You can't open it, Mommy. I mean it, my daughter Lily, who was 7, said with a serious look on her face. I had never seen her like this before, and it shocked me how serious she was. What's wrong, Lily? That package is for me. Let go of it. No. She pushed me away from the package. It looked like a gift, but we didn't know who it was from, so we needed to check it and thank the person. Lily, what's the problem? I need to open it. It could be from Grandma, and we need to thank her for it. Lily seemed upset but thought for a moment. She then looked at me and said, Then let's call Officer Clark. It's okay if we open it with him. What? Music. It's coming together nicely, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead after finishing cleaning up my room. It was a lot of work, but it didn't bother me. It was all for the baby I was about to have. My name is Sarah, and I'm 35 years old. I'm a housewife, and my family includes my husband James, our daughter Lily, and me. James works for a big company and tries his best to take care of us even though he's busy. Lily is sweet and calm. People often tell me how good she is with younger kids and how she keeps them from fighting. But Lily sometimes does strange things like staring at empty spots or saying, "This place feels scary," when we go somewhere new. Other than that, she's a normal, healthy girl. I'm happy staying at home, supporting my family, and excited about the new baby. Life is good, and we don't have many worries. One day, as I was walking downstairs holding my belly, I saw someone standing by the door. I sighed when I recognized the person. Sarah, are you home? Yes, I'm coming. Lately, I've been worried about my mother-in-law. She's from a wealthy family and spoils her only son, James. After we moved to our new house, she decided to live nearby. Since then, she visits almost every day, criticizing me before leaving. When I greeted her at the door, she clicked her tongue and walked into the living room. This room is always messy. Are these Lily's toys? You should make her clean up right away. Well, I promised Lily she could clean up when she gets home. What kind of answer is that? This is why people like you don't know any better. You're being rude, I wanted to say, but I stayed quiet. My mother-in-law wanted James to marry someone from a wealthy family who would stay at home and have sons. She didn't like me because I didn't fit her idea of the perfect wife. I just wish she could be nicer so we could live more peacefully. That night, I told James about her visit. He frowned and looked upset. Is she still saying things like that? Don't worry, I'll talk to her. But it's okay. Our life together is what matters most. The next day, James went to see his mom. He thought if he talked to her, she would stop being so harsh. I really appreciated having a husband like James, but at the time, I didn't realize how much he was trying for me. I noticed Lily was watching James with a worried expression. A few days later, a package arrived. The delivery person handed it to me, and I wondered who it was from. The box was light, but I didn't know what was inside. I was about to put it on the table to open it when Lily ran up to me. Mommy, wait. What is it? Lily grabbed the box and ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. I didn't understand what she was doing, so I knocked on the door. Lily, that's the package. Maybe it's from Grandma. Can you give it to me? Just as I was about to knock again, Lily opened the door. She held the package close to her, like she didn't want me to have it, and looked unhappy. Then she ran out the door, heading for the dumpster. Wait, Lily, what are you doing? Once Lily made sure the box was placed in the trash, I grabbed her arm. Hey, what's going on? I won't be mad, just tell me what was in the box. Mommy, you can't see it. Lily shouted at the trash can with a serious look on her face. I was confused because I didn't understand why she was acting this way. Lily, just give me the box. Lily must have had a reason for saying this, but since it was a gift, we needed to check what was inside and thank the person properly. I knew it wasn't going to be easy to get her to back down. How can you stop me? It could be from Grandma, and we have to thank her for it. Lily looked upset and hesitated for a moment. Then she finally said, Then call Officer Clark from across the street. We can open it with him. Lily went quiet after that. I didn't know what to do, but I went to Officer Clark's house and explained everything. He kindly agreed to help, and we opened the box together. Lily was still nervous. When Officer Clark opened it, we froze. What? I could barely breathe when I saw what was inside. The box was full of toy cars, but they were all covered in a dark, reddish-black substance. No, it wasn't just dirt. It was blood. As I looked closer, I saw words written on some of the cars. Each one had a message wishing bad things for my unborn child. I understood what they meant, but my mind couldn't accept it. It reminded me of terrible memories I had tried to forget. I felt dizzy, and everything went black. I fainted. Later, Officer Clark and Lily helped me back home. The box and its contents were taken by the police. They found out the words were written in fish blood. Officer Clark suggested we report it, and I believe the people responsible will eventually be caught, but it will take time to heal from this. I lay on my bed, thinking about the past. Back when I was in middle school, someone left death threat letters on my desk. I didn't know why. Maybe it was just my turn to be picked on, like other kids before me, but that was enough to break my heart. After that, I couldn't bring myself to go to school, and I became terrified of letters written in red ink that talked about bad things. "Hey Sarah, are you okay? Do you want to eat something?" "Yeah, thank you, honey." My husband James brought tea and cookies to my bedside. "I'm sorry, I'm sure my mom is behind this. But we don't know for sure it was your mom. Who else could it be?" I went to talk to her, but she just brushed us off. Still, I had a feeling my mother-in-law wasn't the one who did this, even though she had always been difficult with me. I didn't think she would go this far. The way the person targeted my past trauma seemed way too accurate. Only my close family and James knew about what happened to me in middle school. I had an older sister named Olivia, but we hadn't spoken in a long time. Olivia was reckless and jealous. When I got married, she clearly wanted to take James away, not because she liked him, but because of his status and background. Then I remembered an email I got from my childhood friend, Mia, about Olivia. Mia and I hadn't seen each other much since we both became moms, but we kept in touch now and then. Mia had been a huge support when I was being harassed, and we promised to help each other if needed. A month ago, Mia had emailed me about Olivia. "I saw Olivia and your mother-in-law together. Is everything okay?" Maybe Olivia had told my mother-in-law about my trauma, something I hadn't noticed at the time. But now, I realize it was a smart and cruel form of harassment. Olivia could definitely do something like that. I remembered a time when Lily and I went to visit my parents and Olivia brought her fiancé. She was bragging about him the whole time, but when Lily saw her, she said, "Aunt Olivia has a lot of men around her. It's dangerous." After that, Olivia's fiancé investigated her life and found out about her past relationships, causing their engagement to end. Olivia already hated me, but Lily's comment made things worse. For a while, Olivia was awful. She would hang around Lily's kindergarten, call the police on us, and make silent phone calls. Our parents were furious, and Olivia had to promise in writing never to come near us again. Since then, I heard Olivia had been working part-time and had gotten involved with married men. There were some serious money problems too. After I started feeling better, I contacted Mia. She was furious about everything, almost like it was her own problem. She found Olivia's Instagram. As I thought, Olivia's the one behind this. Look at this. When Mia showed me the screen, I almost passed out. There were a lot of hidden photos of me and Lily showing times and places where we went. After looking for a bit, I noticed one person was commenting a lot. "Could it be your mother-in-law?" I looked more closely, and sure enough, I found a photo of my mother-in-law at a cafe. Olivia's nails and my mother-in-law's bag were in the picture together. The caption read, "Strategy meeting." It made my blood boil. It was unforgivable to mess with someone's life like that. Our parents and Olivia were planning to come to my father-in-law's memorial service in 2 weeks. I decided I would confront them then. When I got home, I told James my plan, and to my surprise, he agreed right away. He even suggested we report them, knowing we had his support and Mia's as well. "We'll get through this together." On the day of the memorial service, Mia and her husband joined us, along with a few other guests I invited. James started his speech as the host. "Thank you all for coming today." James pointed to his mother. "Mom, we are cutting ties with you today." "What are you talking about?" my mother-in-law said, clearly flustered. I quickly showed screenshots of social media posts, evidence of the harassment, recordings, and the photos of the bloody cards. Then, at a signal, many men stood up. Olivia's face changed as soon as she saw them. These were men who had been deceived by her, but had finally given up and started seeking justice. I had contacted them and brought up a lawsuit against Olivia. My mother-in-law and sister sat there, looking defeated. After seeing their faces, Lily whispered, "Grandpa is really angry, and the man with the scar under his eye is really angry too." As soon as my sister heard that, she started shaking. No one would go this far. "Oh, I didn't do anything wrong. I was dragged into this by the old woman." "What are you talking about? I don't know anything." "You did it, didn't you? Which one of you sent that box of cards?" At that moment, Lily, who had been silent next to me, pointed and said, "It's Dad, right? And Mommy's friend over there." "Lily, what are you saying?" "Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Kids are scary." I felt like crying as I watched them try to lie to me. I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. I didn't want to accept that the two people I trusted most were part of the conspiracy against me. "It's okay, I already know. Right, James and Mia?" I had actually received a message from Mia's husband asking me to look into whether James and Mia were having an affair. I hired a private investigator just to calm myself, even though I couldn't believe it. But the results came in, and even when the evidence was shown, I still trusted them both. Lily had also told me before, Daddy was playing with fish at night. It was really scary. At the time, I didn't understand, but it seemed like she had seen James making the bloodletter cards. My daughter must have sensed something was wrong with him. She said the baby inside me had told her about it. James and Mia both turned pale and knelt down. "James, why did you do this?" "Because Mom and Olivia didn't know. You and Lily were in my way, so I thought if everything went right, I could get rid of both of you and get some compensation." Disgusted by his explanation, I slapped James without thinking. A few years had passed since that day. "Hey, Logan, it's time for dinner." Lily brought a spoon to her little brother's mouth, who was now 2 years old. Logan happily ate. It was a simple, but joyful moment. I never imagined I would see such happiness after everything that happened. Afterward, James and Mia were cut off from their families. My sister and mother-in-law also faced terrible consequences. My sister was pushed by a stranger and suffered several bone fractures along with lasting effects. The suspect was described as a man with a scar under his eye. There were no other leads. My ex-mother-in-law developed dementia and was placed in a care facility, where she has nightmares every night. James and Mia broke up. Mia now acts recklessly, blaming James for not being able to see her child. As for James, he had to quit his job because of mysterious physical pain. Despite all of that, my family now lives in peace. Lily seems more at ease now than when James was around. She cares for her little brother every day and loves having him by her side. One day, I asked Lily, "Hey, do you still see anything strange?" "What do you mean, Mom?" Lily tilted her head cutely and then went back to taking care of Logan. Her strange ability was gone now, but it was that ability that helped us find peace. Looking at my precious children, I decided to live my life fully, without any shame.
It was another day in what had become a monotonous routine. I sat at the kitchen table, absently swirling a spoon in my half-drunk cup of coffee. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound accompanying me. My baby, barely 6 months old, slept soundly in the next room. I could hear the gentle rise and fall of his breathing on the baby monitor. He was my only anchor, my tiny beacon of light in a world that had grown increasingly dark. David, my husband, was upstairs packing for a trip to visit his parents, a trip I had no desire to take. The thought of being stuck in a car with him for hours, pretending we were a happy family, filled me with dread. Things between us had been tense for months. His dismissive attitude, his temper, and his complete lack of empathy had turned our marriage into a battlefield where I felt outnumbered and unarmed. I glanced at the calendar on the wall, the date circled in red, family visit. My stomach churned at the sight. I wanted to call it off, to tell David I wasn't feeling well, but I knew how he'd react. He'd accuse me of being selfish, of trying to ruin his plans. Just go along with it, I whispered to myself, though my heart screamed in protest. "Lisa, are you packed yet?" David's voice thundered down the stairs, sharp and impatient. I took a deep breath before answering. "I'm not sure I should go, David. I'm feeling a bit off today." There was a pause before his footsteps pounded down the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of frustration. "You're always feeling off. You'll be fine. Just rest in the car if you're tired." I tried to muster a response, but his dismissive tone cut me off before I could even start. He strode past me, grabbed my half-packed bag from the corner, and shoved it toward me. "Come on, we're already running late." Reluctantly, I followed him to the car. As I settled into the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the gnawing unease in my chest. Something about today felt wrong. We were barely out of the driveway when it happened. A sharp, unmistakable gush of warmth spread down my legs. For a moment, I was frozen, trying to process what was happening. Then it hit me, my water had broken. "David," I gasped, "my water just broke. We need to go to the hospital, now." He slammed on the brakes, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "Are you serious? Now?" "Yes, now," I snapped, panic rising in my voice. "The baby's coming." Instead of springing into action, David muttered something under his breath, grabbed a towel from the back seat, and threw it at me. "Clean it up," he said, his voice flat. "Clean it up?" I echoed in disbelief. "David, this is serious, we have to go." He cut me off, throwing open his door and walking around to mine. Before I could comprehend what was happening, he yanked the passenger door open and barked, "Get out." "What?" My voice cracked. "Get out of the car," he yelled. "You're going to ruin the seats." Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled out of the car, clutching my belly. "How could you do this? I'm your wife, and I'm having your child." He glared at me, his face twisted in annoyance. "This isn't my fault, Lisa, you should have planned this better. Call an ambulance or something." And with that, he got back into the car, slammed the door, and drove away, leaving me alone on the side of the road. I stood there, stunned and trembling, watching the taillights disappear down the road. My phone felt like a lifeline in my pocket as I dialed for an ambulance, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. Before the operator could answer, a voice called out behind me. "Lisa, are you okay?" I turned to see Sarah, my neighbor, rushing toward me. She'd always been kind, but we'd never been particularly close. Yet in that moment, she looked like an angel sent to save me. "My water broke," I managed to choke out between sobs. "David, he left me here." Her face darkened with shock and fury, but her voice remained calm. "We need to get you to the hospital, come on." She helped me into her car, her movements careful but decisive. As she drove, she held my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "You're going to be okay," she said softly, "I promise." When we arrived at the hospital, Sarah didn't leave my side. She stayed with me through the paperwork, through the hurried footsteps of nurses, and even as I was wheeled into a room, her presence was a steady comfort, like a lighthouse guiding me through the storm. My parents arrived not long after, their faces etched with worry. Sarah pulled them aside to explain what had happened, her voice low but firm. I watched from my hospital bed, my heart swelling with gratitude. This woman, who owed me nothing, had done more for me in a single day than David had in months. As the labor pains intensified, I made a silent vow. David would pay for what he'd done, not out of spite, but to protect my baby and myself. I wouldn't let him drag us down any longer. When I finally heard my baby's cries, relief and joy washed over me. I held him close, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, and felt a surge of love stronger than anything I'd ever known. This was the beginning of a new chapter, and I was determined to write it on my own terms. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft whimpers of my newborn nestled in my arms. The exhaustion from labor weighed heavily on me, but I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of David, his callousness, his abandonment, and the cold, heartless way he had left me on the side of the road. I stared at the baby, his tiny fingers curling and uncurling as he drifted in and out of sleep. A deep sadness filled my chest, but there was also something else, resolve. He deserved better than the chaos David would bring into our lives, and so did I. The door creaked open, and Sarah peeked her head in, carrying a cup of tea. "How's my favorite little family?" she whispered, smiling warmly. I managed a weak smile. "We're okay, thanks to you." She set the tea down and pulled up a chair beside me. "Lisa, I've been thinking, you can't go back to him, not after this." I looked away, her words cutting too close to the truth. "I don't know where to start, Sarah, I don't even have a plan." "Start by knowing your worth," she said firmly. "You're stronger than you think." Later that afternoon, as I rested with the baby, the sound of raised voices outside my hospital room jolted me awake. My heart sank. I recognized David's voice. He barged in moments later, his expression unreadable. "Lisa," he began, his eyes darting between me and the baby, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I said, my voice sharp and unforgiving. "I think you said everything you needed to when you left me on the side of the road." David flinched, but quickly regained his composure. I panicked. "Okay, I made a mistake, but I'm here now. Let's just move past it." I stared at him in disbelief. "Move past it? David, you abandoned me during labor. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? What if something had happened to me or the baby? He sighed, his frustration bubbling to the surface. Lisa, you're blowing this out of proportion. I came to see my son, didn't I? Doesn't that count for something? His son, not our son. The words stung, but they also clarified something for me. David didn't see us as a family, he saw us as obligations, burdens to be managed. I realized then that I couldn't stay in this marriage. Not for another day. You need to leave, I said firmly, my voice trembling but resolute. What? He blinked, caught off guard. You're kicking me out of the hospital? Yes, I said, my grip tightening around my baby. I don't want you here. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but he simply shrugged. Fine, have it your way. As he stormed out, I felt a wave of relief mixed with a lingering sense of fear. I had stood up to him, but I knew this was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and overwhelming exhaustion. My parents stayed with me at the hospital, their quiet support a balm to my frayed nerves. They hadn't said much about David, but I could see the concern in their eyes. On the day of my discharge, my father pulled me aside. Lisa, he said gently, we're proud of you for standing up to David, but what's your plan now? I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on me. I'm going to file for separation, I said finally. I can't go back to him, not after what he did. My father nodded, his expression both relieved and worried. You know we're here for you, right? Whatever you need. Their support gave me strength, but I knew this was a battle I'd have to fight on my own. Returning to the house I had shared with David was out of the question. Instead, I moved in with my parents temporarily, setting up a nursery in the room I had grown up in. As I settled into this new phase of life, I started reaching out to lawyers and support groups. It was terrifying, but it was also empowering. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life. The weeks that followed were both challenging and rewarding. Every day was a balancing act, caring for my baby, managing my emotions, and navigating the legalities of separating from David. But amidst the chaos, there were moments of pure joy, like the first time my baby smiled at me, or the way he curled into my arms when he was sleepy. Sarah visited often, bringing meals and words of encouragement. You're doing great, she said one afternoon as she rocked the baby to sleep. I hope you know that. I don't feel great, I admitted. Some days, I don't even feel like myself. That's normal, she said, but you're stronger than you think. You've already come so far. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. Just when I thought I was finding my footing, David reappeared, this time with demands. He showed up at my parents' house one evening, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. You can't just take my son away from me, he said, his voice low and menacing. I have rights. No one's stopping you from being a father, I said, keeping my voice calm, but you don't get to control me anymore. His eyes narrowed. You think you're better off without me? You're nothing without me, Lisa. The words stung, but they didn't break me. You're wrong, I said quietly. I'm everything without you. I shut the door in his face, my hands trembling. I knew this wasn't the end of his threats, but I also knew I wasn't the same scared, dependent woman he had once controlled. That night, as I held my baby close, I made a promise to him and to myself. I would fight for our future, no matter how difficult it was. I wouldn't let David's anger or manipulation dictate our lives. I began documenting everything, every interaction with David, every threat he made. My lawyer had advised me to keep detailed records, and I was determined to be prepared for whatever came next. At the same time, I leaned on the people who cared about me. My parents, Sarah, and the support group I had joined became my lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this battle. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild. Each small victory, a peaceful day, a milestone with the baby, was a step forward, and with every step, I felt my confidence grow. Life with my baby, whom I'd named Oliver, was a mix of exhaustion and wonder. Every coup, every tiny milestone, felt like a victory, a reminder of the life I was building for us. My days were consumed by caring for him, attending parenting classes, and working with my lawyer to navigate the separation. I was trying to create a semblance of normalcy, but David's shadow loomed large. He began calling incessantly, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic pleas to angry outbursts. I ignored most of them, forwarding anything threatening to my lawyer. One morning, as I sat in the living room feeding Oliver, my phone buzzed with another message from David. This one was different. Lisa, I'm done playing nice. If you don't let me see my son, I'll make your life hell. You've been warned. The words sent a shiver down my spine. My lawyer assured me I was doing everything right, But David's unpredictability was a constant source of anxiety. One afternoon, during my first tentative visit back to the office, David showed up unannounced. He was waiting by the building entrance, his face twisted with frustration. "David, you can't be here," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the fear bubbling in my chest. "You're avoiding me," he accused. "You won't take my calls, and now you're keeping me from my son." "I'm not avoiding you," I said, stepping back as he moved closer. "I'm protecting Oliver. You abandoned us, David. You can't just show up and demand access." His voice rose, drawing the attention of a few coworkers. "He's my son too, Lisa. You don't get to make all the decisions." "Then take it to court," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "But stop harassing me." Before he could respond, security arrived, escorting him off the premises. The humiliation on his face was evident, but I didn't feel triumphant. If anything, I felt more trapped than ever. After the incident at work, my lawyer advised me to file for a restraining order. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. Despite everything, part of me wanted to believe David could change, that he could be a better father than he had been a husband. But the threats, the unpredictable behavior, and the scene at my workplace left me with little choice. I had to prioritize Oliver's safety and my own. The court hearing was a nerve-wracking experience. David showed up with his lawyer, looking polished and composed, a stark contrast to the volatile man I knew. He painted himself as a devoted father, a man who had made mistakes but deserved a chance to be in his son's life. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out the facts: the abandonment during labor, the threats, the harassment. My lawyer presented the voicemails and documented incidents, painting a clear picture of David's behavior. The judge granted the restraining order, restricting David's contact with me and allowing supervised visits with Oliver. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward. With the restraining order in place, a sense of relief settled over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Oliver and I fell into a new rhythm, surrounded by love and support from my family and friends. One evening, Sarah invited me to a small gathering at her house. It was a chance to unwind, to remember that I was more than just a mother navigating a messy separation. Among the guests was Daniel, a mutual friend of Sarah's. He was kind, with an easy smile and a warmth that felt disarming. We struck up a conversation, sharing stories about work and life. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made my chest feel lighter. As the night went on, I found myself drawn to him. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a simple connection that felt refreshing. The peace didn't last long. A week after the gathering at Sarah's, I received a letter from David's lawyer. He was contesting the custody arrangements, seeking joint custody of Oliver. The thought of sharing parenting responsibilities with David was unbearable. "He's trying to get back at me," I told my lawyer during a tense meeting. "This isn't about Oliver, it's about control." "I believe you," she said, "but we need to focus on the evidence. If we can prove that joint custody isn't in Oliver's best interest, the court will side with you." The thought of another legal battle was exhausting, but I knew I couldn't back down. Oliver deserved stability, not the chaos David would bring into his life. The weeks leading up to the custody hearing were some of the hardest I'd faced. David's legal team dug into every aspect of my life, trying to paint me as an unfit mother. They questioned my decision to live with my parents, my ability to balance work and motherhood, even my brief interaction with Daniel. Through it all, I held on to the support of the people around me, my parents, Sarah, and even Daniel, who had become a steady presence in my life, reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. The hearing was tense and emotional. Both sides presented their arguments, but in the end, the court ruled in my favor. David was granted limited visitation, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough. After the hearing, I sat in the car with my lawyer, tears streaming down my face. They were a mix of relief, exhaustion, and gratitude. The fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges, but I had proven to myself that I could stand up for Oliver and for me. When I got home that evening, I found Daniel waiting on the porch. He didn't say much, just pulled me into a hug that felt like home. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said softly. "Oliver's lucky to have you." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The days following the custody ruling brought a rare stillness to my life. The weight of the legal battle lifted, leaving space for me to reflect on everything that had transpired. I spent hours with Oliver, marveling at the tiny miracles of his growth, his first tooth, the way he reached for me when he needed comfort, the small giggles that seemed to erase the darkest days. He was my reason for everything, my light in every storm. David's supervised visits began soon after. I felt a pang of anxiety each time I handed Oliver over to the court-appointed monitor, but the arrangement offered me a sense of control. I knew Oliver would be safe, and that was enough. One evening, as I rocked Oliver to sleep, I thought about the person I had been before all this, a young woman brimming with dreams, but uncertain of her strength. Life had tested me in ways I never expected, but I'd emerged stronger, more sure of who I was and what I deserved. My friendship with Daniel continued to blossom. He wasn't just a source of support, he became someone I looked forward to seeing, someone who reminded me that joy still existed, even in the aftermath of chaos. One Saturday, he invited me and Oliver to a park. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day that made the world feel brighter. Daniel brought a blanket and a basket of snacks, and we spent hours under the shade of a tree, talking and laughing while Oliver napped in my arms. "You've been through so much," Daniel said, his voice gentle, "but you're still standing. That's incredible." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "Oliver needed me." He smiled, his gaze warm. "And you've been there for him every step of the way. But you deserve happiness too, Lisa." His words stayed with me long after we left the park. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival, a future that included love and laughter. David's visits were uneventful at first, but over time, he began to change. He started sending small gifts for Oliver, leaving notes apologizing for his past behavior. I remained wary, but I couldn't ignore the effort he was making. One afternoon, after a particularly peaceful visit, David asked to speak with me. "I know I've been a terrible husband and father," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to be better for Oliver." His words stirred a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that he could change, but another part of me remembered the pain he'd caused, the sleepless nights, and the fear. "I appreciate the effort you're making," I said carefully, "but trust takes time. If you're serious about being there for Oliver, prove it with your actions." It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a step toward understanding, a fragile bridge between the past and the future. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. David continued his supervised visits, slowly earning the court's trust, while our relationship remained distant. We found a way to co-parent with civility. Meanwhile, my bond with Daniel deepened. He wasn't just a friend anymore, he was someone I could lean on, someone who made me feel safe. One evening, after putting Oliver to bed, Daniel stayed for dinner. As we sat on the couch, talking about everything and nothing, he reached for my hand. "Lisa," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I know you've been through so much. I don't want to rush anything, but I care about you. I care about Oliver, and I want to be here for both of you, if you'll let me." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. "I'd like that," I whispered. It wasn't a grand declaration or a sweeping romance, it was quiet and real, built on trust and understanding. On Oliver's first birthday, I threw a small party at my parents' house. It was a celebration of not just his life, but everything we'd overcome together. Friends and family gathered in the backyard, showering Oliver with love and laughter. David showed up briefly, bringing a small, thoughtful gift for Oliver, a handmade photo album filled with pictures of their visits. He stayed just long enough to share a moment with his son before quietly leaving, giving me a small nod of acknowledgement as he went. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was enough. David was trying, and that mattered. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I stood in the quiet house, holding Oliver as he drifted off to sleep. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the heartbreak, the challenges, the unexpected moments of grace. I wasn't the same person I'd been a year ago. I was stronger, more resilient, and more certain of my worth. Life hadn't unfolded the way I'd imagined, but in its messiness and beauty, it had given me everything I needed. As I put Oliver in his crib and turned off the light, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I could handle it. I had my son, my family, and the beginnings of a new love. And for the first time, I felt truly free. My name is Bella, and life has a way of teaching you who's really in control. Not long ago, I would have eagerly told anyone about my marriage to Willie, brimming with the joy of a newlywed. I truly believed that leaving my promising career at Ventic Tech to focus on our marriage was the right decision. Love, after all, is supposed to be worth more than money, isn't it? Ventic Tech had its quirks, but it also had strict policies, especially about workplace relationships. Once Willie and I tied the knot, we were thrust into an awkward spotlight. Our boss, Gary, wasted no time delivering an ultimatum. with all the theatrics of a reality show host. That evening, our conversation felt like a scene from a high-stakes drama. Blinded by love, I caved. The next day, I handed in my resignation and walked away from a career I had worked so hard to build. Fast forward to today, and here I am, cleaning up spilled cereal because Willie, ever the soon-to-be promoted, can't manage to aim for his bowl. Didn't your mother teach you better? I shout, half joking, toward the living room. My words disappear into the walls, his defensive reply arriving just as invisibly. I let it go. It's not worth another argument. Once, we teased each other with ease. Now, every conversation feels like navigating a minefield. Hours later, Willie is glued to the couch, the TV casting a dull glow over his indifferent face. I glance at the untouched dinner table, the remnants of what we once had haunting the silence. Are we going to talk? Or is that couch your new lifelong commitment? I ask, forcing the words out. About what? His reply is sharp and dismissive, without even a glance in my direction. I count to 12, clinging to patience. About us, about where this mess is heading. My voice cracks slightly. He shrugs. That shrug, heavier than any shout, fills the room with a suffocating silence. The TV chatters on, oblivious to the collapse happening within its reach. That's when it hits me. Our marriage, once so sturdy, now feels like a house of cards collapsing under its own weight. The bond we'd built is crumbling, piece by piece, and neither of us seems to know how to stop it. Life, with its cruel irony, has turned our plans and dreams into fragile remnants of what once was. I linger, watching him. The man on the couch feels like a stranger, a distant passenger I might pass on the street. The shift from warmth to indifference was subtle but devastating, like the first bite of frost signaling the end of summer. Later that evening, I prepare his favorite meal, steak, seasoned and cooked just the way he likes, or so I thought. As he enters the kitchen, his heavy footsteps foreshadow his sour mood. He scans the table like a predator sizing up its prey. He picks up a piece of steak with his hands, ignoring the utensils beside him. Is this the best you can do now? His tone is gritty, like sandpaper. It's slightly cooler than usual, I reply cautiously, referring to the temperature. Not what? He snaps, his glare cutting into me. I bite my tongue, holding back the flood of thoughts. Speaking up would only make things worse. When I say I want my steak hot, he continues, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. I expect to feel the life leaving it as I cut in. This, he jabs the steak with his fork, is already dead and gone. His words, devoid of any shouting, carry a venom so sharp it leaves me hollow. He pushes the plate away and meets my gaze for a fleeting moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of contempt and resignation. Forget it, he mutters, turning away, grabbing his keys. He delivers a final blow. Fix your mistakes, Bella, or next time, it won't just be dinner getting tossed out. The door slams shut behind him, the echo punctuating the end of what little joy remained in our relationship. I stand there, staring at the uneaten meal, wondering how we reached this point, and if there's any way back. I stood motionless, staring at the door Willie had slammed shut behind him. The sound still echoed in the silence of the apartment, reverberating like a final punctuation to an unspoken truth. I exhaled slowly, glancing down at the abandoned steak on the table. Its cold, lifeless state mirrored my own feelings, discarded and forlorn. Each step toward the trash can felt heavier than the last, a somber reminder of what I was throwing away, my effort, my care, and the fragile hope that things could still change. To the outside world, we were the picture of a perfect couple, admired by friends, praised by his parents, but behind closed doors, the reality was far from ideal. Willie's demands had become relentless, chipping away at my self-esteem with every passing day. My life revolved around seeking his approval, which had grown as rare as sunlight in a storm. Tonight was no different. The dinner table became a stage for his critiques. "What's this?" he asked flatly, pointing at the plate of steamed broccoli and grilled chicken I had set before him. "Dinner," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Broccoli again? Do you know how to make anything else?" His words dripped with disdain as he pushed the plate away like it was contaminated. Suppressing a retort, I offered, "I can make something else." His sneer was immediate. That would be a first. The sting of his words fueled a simmering anger within me, but I turned back to the kitchen. Before I could start anew, his sharp voice cut through the air. "Where are you going?" "To cook," I answered, barely keeping the edge out of my tone. He stood abruptly, the screech of his chair grating against the floor. "Sit down. Let's not pretend you have other plans. Your world revolves around me, remember?" His words were a leash, yanking me back into the reality I'd been too afraid to confront. Yeah, I murmured, defeated, returning to the table. Later that night, as silence filled the apartment, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The weight of unsaid words and unmet dreams pressed down on me. This wasn't a partnership, it was a prison, built on dependence, fear, and a facade of perfection. But life has a way of intervening in unexpected ways. One cold, ordinary day, I slipped on a patch of ice while carrying groceries. Pain shot through my leg, sharp and unforgiving. A few bystanders rushed to help, their concern a stark contrast to the indifference I had grown accustomed to. At the hospital, a doctor confirmed what I already suspected: my leg was broken. "It's broken," he said matter-of-factly, as if announcing the weather. The real pain wasn't from the injury but from the dread of telling Willie. I sent him a text, "Broke my leg." At the hospital, his response never came. That night in the hospital was cold and lonely. The nurses were efficient but distant, and the stale coffee did little to warm me. By morning, I was discharged with crutches, a cast as stark as the snow outside, and a pile of instructions. Willie was waiting when I got home, his face stormy, no concern, no questions about how I was feeling. His first words were, "Where's dinner?" Standing there on crutches, my leg immobilized, something inside me snapped. "What do you think happened? I went dancing? Look at my leg," I yelled, my voice cracking under the weight of all I'd held back. He barely flinched. His only response was a dismissive wave of his hand as he turned away, muttering about how I should have been more careful. In that moment, the full extent of his selfishness and neglect hit me like a tidal wave. The life I had tried so hard to salvage wasn't just broken, it was unsalvageable. Willie's tirade made his feelings painfully clear. My broken leg was, in his eyes, an inconvenience I had inflicted on him. "You always have excuses," he spat bitterly. "You can't even do the one thing you're supposed to, can you?" I stared at him, astounded. After a harrowing night in the hospital, his only concern was dinner. The sheer indifference stung more than my injury. The air between us felt as cold as the ice I'd slipped on. A chilling confirmation that this was more than a physical wound, it was a fracture in our relationship, one that had been forming for years. Despite my trembling hands and aching body, I limped to the kitchen and began preparing dinner. Each step felt like an eternity, a cruel mockery of my efforts to maintain normalcy. Near the trash bin, overflowing from a day of neglect, I hesitated. I knew Willie wouldn't let it go. "What's this?" he barked, his sharp tone cutting through the tension. "You're home all day and can't even handle the trash?" He stormed over, fury radiating off him, and with a swift kick, he sent the contents sprawling across the floor. "Clean it up," he commanded. My hand shook as I knelt down, not from the physical pain, but from a deeper, more profound hurt. That night, sleep eluded me as his harsh words echoed in my head, mingling with the hot sting of tears. By morning, nothing had changed except my resolve. The kitchen table was now adorned with divorce papers. As the coffee dripped in the background, Willie stumbled in, bleary-eyed and reeking of alcohol. "Morning," he growled, his voice rough. "What's for breakfast?" Without a word, I pushed the papers toward him. He glanced down, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "You serious?" he scoffed. "As a heart attack," I replied, my heart pounding but my voice steady. He laughed, loud and dismissive. "You ain't got the guts." "I already filed," I countered, meeting his sneer with a steady gaze. "Just need your signature." He leaned in close, his voice low and venomous. "You think you can survive without me? You're a broken bird, can't even take out the trash." "I'm done talking, Willie," I said firmly. "Sign the papers, or I'll have the authorities force you to." His face twisted with rage, but he grabbed the pen and scrawled his name, each stroke heavy and deliberate, tossing the pen down like it burned him. He sneered. "Good luck, darling, you'll be crawling back before the month's up." But I wouldn't, I couldn't. This was my line in the sand. The moment I refused to accept any more of his cruelty, despite everything, I smiled. Those signed papers felt like my first step, on crutches, maybe, but toward a better life. "Crawling's not my style," I murmured. The next morning, an eerie silence greeted me. Over coffee, Willie casually mentioned the property split. "Got a lawyer," he said, his tone as commanding as ever. "You coming with me?" Still healing, with my choices seeming limited, I nodded. Willie helped me into the car, his actions oddly gentle as he propped up my cast. Everything felt strangely normal as we drove, the city skyline shrinking behind us like a distant memory. Suddenly, he pulled over to the side of the highway. The tire might need air, he mumbled, stepping out to inspect it. Leaning heavily on the car, I followed, unsure of his intentions. He pretended to fuss with the tires, his movements calculated. Then, without warning, he jumped back into the driver's seat. Before I could react, he hit the gas and sped off, leaving me stranded. I stood there, stunned, watching his car vanish down the highway, the sound of the engine fading into silence. I gripped my crutches tightly, disbelieving but strangely resolute. Alone on that desolate stretch of road, I realized this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of my freedom. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and called him in desperation. Willie's voice came through cold and smug. "Come back," I yelled, my voice cracking with frustration and fear. He just laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "This is what you get for trying to divorce me," he sneered before hanging up. The line went dead, and I stood there, the taillights of his car fading into the distance, alone on the side of a desolate road. The winter chill gnawed at me, a cruel echo of my abandonment. Cars sped past, their drivers oblivious to my plight, their indifference stinging as much as the icy wind. Minutes turned into an eternity until finally, a rattling Jeep truck pulled up beside me. To my shock, it was Gary, my former boss. His gruff, familiar voice broke through my haze. "You look like hell, Bella," he said, his concern cutting through the cold. "Why didn't you call someone?" I shrugged, the weight of the day pressing down on me. "Thought I could handle it," I murmured, ashamed of how wrong I'd been. Gary's expression darkened. "He left you here, with a broken leg? That man's a coward," he growled, helping me into the warmth of his Jeep. The drive to Ventic Tech was quiet but heavy with unspoken understanding. Gary guided me into his office, where he handed me a steaming mug of coffee. The warmth seeped into my frozen hands, thawing both my body and my spirits. "Thanks," I said softly, taking a sip. Gary paced, his agitation evident. "I can't believe that bastard," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then, turning to face me, he asked, "What are you going to do now, Bella?" "I don't know," I admitted, the uncertainty of my future looming large. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need you back here. The team hasn't been the same since you left." A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. "You serious?" "As a heart attack," he replied. "You're the best we ever had. I should have fought harder to keep you." I glanced down at my cast. "Might be tricky with this." Gary waved off my concern. "We'll manage. I'll wait until you're ready. No excuses, no saying no." I smiled faintly, touched by his belief in me. "I'll think about it," I said, though deep down, I'd already decided. The tension in the office was palpable as Willie stormed in the next morning. His boots thudded across the floor with less certainty than usual. When he saw me standing beside Gary, his face paled before quickly hardening into a sneer. "What's this about?" he barked, his voice edged with defiance. Gary gestured to a chair. "Sit," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Willie remained standing, crossing his arms in a show of bravado. "Willie," Gary began, his gaze cold and cutting, "I've seen some poor decisions in my time, but what you've done takes the cake." Willie's eyes darted to me, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "What lies has she been feeding you?" "No lies needed," I replied calmly, "just the truth, recorded loud and clear." Gary slid a recording device across the desk. "Care to listen to your greatest hits?" Willie's face went ashen. "You can't fire me over this," he sputtered. "Oh, I can, and I am," Gary shot back, his voice like steel. Willie's desperation mounted. "I'll sue." "Go ahead," I said, my voice cold, "but you'll lose. I've got all the evidence I need, and you've got nothing but empty threats." Gary stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor like a declaration of war. "Get out, Willie, you're done here." Willie stormed out, defeated, and the weight of his departure lifted from my shoulders. In court, the judge's gavel fell decisively. "This court grants the separation and orders compensation to be paid," the judge declared. It felt like the first breath of spring, chilly but full of promise. Back at work, I settled into a rhythm, every keystroke a step toward rebuilding my life. My colleagues' greetings were warm, their support unwavering. "Feels weird, huh?" Harold said one morning, leaning against my desk. I smiled. "Weird doesn't cover it. Feels like I've come back from the dead." He chuckled. "Zombie Bella, back for revenge?" "Something like that," I said, grinning, "but this time, I'm not taking crap from anyone." That's the spirit, Harold said, his nod full of encouragement. This wasn't just a fresh start, it was a reclaimed life, and I was ready to live it on my terms. Hello, everyone, I'm Marilyn, and I want to share a cautionary note with you all. My story involves some deeply challenging experiences with abuse. While I'll keep the details brief, I feel it's important to highlight certain events to shed light on the difficulties I faced with someone who was supposed to be family. Marrying my now ex-husband, Henry, is something I deeply regret. At first, Henry seemed like a wonderful person, and his family appeared equally admirable. His mother, Kayla, was involved in charity work, and his father, Bruce, was a successful businessman who made sure his family never lacked for anything. They seemed like the perfect family, and I was thrilled to join them. But after marrying Henry, things took a darker turn, primarily due to Kayla's behavior toward me. Her treatment started with small, petty actions, like hiding my glasses, phone, and purse, leaving me distressed as I searched for them while she watched, amused. As time went on, the acts grew more malicious. She would ask me to handle scalding hot pots, deliberately causing me pain. One instance stands out. She added fish sauce to a dish knowing I was allergic, causing a severe reaction that made me miss an important event. She would demand hours of cooking from me only to throw the food away afterward, denying any involvement or claiming these actions were accidental. The cruelty escalated further when, at a family gathering, she intentionally caused me to slip, trying to embarrass me in front of everyone. After enduring this for months, I finally confronted Kayla and asked for my husband's support. I demanded to know why she was targeting me, expressing how utterly exhausted I was by her behavior. Her response was pure denial and deflection. She accused me of being overly dramatic, insinuating that my complaints stemmed from jealousy, an accusation that was both baseless and deeply hurtful. Despite Kayla's outward image as a charitable, respected community member, her actions behind closed doors painted a very different picture, one that was difficult to reconcile with the image others had of her. What was even more shocking was the indifference Henry showed toward the abuse I was enduring from his mother. It became clear that Kayla was manipulative, expertly hiding her malicious actions behind a facade of innocence. And despite knowing exactly what was going on, like her dangerous tampering with my food and the deliberate misplacement of my belongings, Henry shockingly sided with her. When I confronted him, urging him to acknowledge his mother's abuse, he dismissed it outright. "You're being ridiculous, Marilyn. My mom would never do that. It's all in your head," he said. His response left me stunned. He echoed Kayla's claims that my worries were simply a result of jealousy and paranoia, completely ignoring the evidence of her malice. His denial of the truth was bewildering, especially from someone who had once shown me love and care. It felt as if I had been struck by lightning, blindsided by his complete disregard for my well-being. That's when Kayla intervened, threatening to kick me out of their home and telling me I was unworthy of their family. She even suggested that Henry could leave with me, hinting at the potential loss of his inheritance if he took my side. Henry's response crushed me. He sided with his mother, reassuring her of his loyalty and promising to correct my behavior. His readiness to dismiss me to preserve his standing in the family exposed a painful truth. Henry's loyalty was not to me, but to his future wealth. We had been living under his parents' roof, their insistence on it, with Henry working for his father's company. While he had some assets, he owned no property of his own and was heavily reliant on his parents for financial security. His sights were set on his father's wealth, and he wasn't about to jeopardize his inheritance by supporting me against his mother. This realization made it clear how deep Henry's greed ran, and how far he was willing to go to protect his interests, no matter the cost to our marriage or my well-being. Bruce, my father-in-law, was often away on business and remained oblivious to the turmoil brewing within the home. I never imagined that Henry, my husband, would choose not to stand up for me. His response to my plea for support was nothing short of shocking. "Marilyn, what's wrong with you? Do you want to risk our place in this family?" he asked dismissively after I shared the details of the abuse I had suffered at the hands of his mother. Feeling disheartened, I shot back, asking, what kind of partner would prioritize his future security over the well-being of his spouse? His defense was equally disheartening. He argued that it was unreasonable for me to expect him to confront his mother, suggesting that doing so could jeopardize his inheritance. I pressed further. "Is your inheritance more important than our marriage?" I suggested that we could start fresh, away from his family's influence, even if it meant living more modestly, but he dismissed the idea immediately, insisting that we could never afford such independence and demanding that I simply endure his mother's treatment without complaint. In that moment, The truth hit me hard. Henry had chosen his path, and it was not the one I had envisioned for us. He was not the partner I believed him to be. Feeling isolated and unsupported, I made a decision. I would not let Kayla's manipulations defeat me. Instead of fleeing, I would expose her for who she truly was. My plan was daring, yet straightforward. I discreetly gathered footage from the house's security cameras, documenting Kayla's abusive actions. I carefully compiled the evidence into a video, setting it aside for the right moment. Kayla's upcoming birthday party, which would be attended by family and guests, including Bruce, her husband. When the day of the celebration arrived, Kayla was the picture of grace and warmth, especially in front of others. Her behavior toward me was surprisingly pleasant, likely because of the company. It was the perfect opportunity to reveal her true nature. My resolve was firm. It was time to expose Kayla's cruelty without making a scene. I played along during the festivities, biding my time. When the birthday cake had been served and the moment felt right, I stood up and addressed the gathering. "Thank you all for joining us to honor Kayla on her special day," I began, my voice steady. "Many of you are familiar with her reputation as a kind and generous individual. Today, I prepared something to showcase just how remarkable my mother-in-law truly is." I gestured toward a screen set up for the occasion. Instead of merely talking about her deeds, I've compiled a video to give you all a closer look. Please enjoy. As the video played, it revealed the truth of Kayla's actions, and the facade she had so skillfully maintained began to crumble before everyone's eyes. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had friends who would stand by me at a moment's notice. After years of enduring mistreatment, my resolve had solidified. I was determined to stand my ground and expose Kayla's duplicity for everyone to see. My concern for what my husband or his mother thought of me had vanished. I was beyond caring. The reaction to the video was immediate and intense. The guests were visibly stunned, while Kayla and Henry were left speechless, caught off guard by the revelation. Bruce, who had been distant due to his business commitments, was understandably shocked by what he saw. When the video ended, it was Bruce who broke the silence, demanding an explanation from Kayla. Kayla, desperate to protect herself, tried to dismiss the footage as manipulated. She insisted she was innocent, accusing me of malice. Her attempt to deflect blame only fueled my determination. The audacity of her claims, suggesting that an entire year of abuse was a product of my imagination, was staggering. I watched, wondering if anyone could still be fooled by her lies after witnessing such clear evidence of her actions. Calmly, I addressed Kayla's attempts to discredit me. "So, you're accusing me of tarnishing your reputation? How about we involve the police and see if they think these videos are fake?" I suggested, keeping my tone steady. Kayla scoffed at the idea, dismissing the police as a waste of time and insisting that the footage was nothing but lies on my part. But the mention of law enforcement clearly rattled her. She hadn't expected me to make such a bold move. This was a step too far for her, and her panic was evident. The revelation of her actions had already caused ripples among her family, but to my surprise, some of Kayla's colleagues from the charitable foundation where she worked were also present. They looked shocked, likely messaging their superiors about what was unfolding before them. In a desperate attempt to salvage her image, Kayla tried to play the victim to Bruce. She lamented how I was supposedly plotting to have her arrested, claiming I was the one causing trouble. She hoped Henry would back her up. Henry's feeble defense only made things worse. "It's not what it seems, Dad. Marilyn's overreacting. Mom's been nothing but kind," he stammered, trying to defend the indefensible. This moment underscored Henry's complete indifference toward the abuse I had suffered. Bruce, catching on to the fact that Henry knew what was happening and had done nothing about it, was visibly shocked. It was becoming clear to everyone that Henry's priorities were seriously skewed, that he valued his inheritance and the luxury of their grand home more than my well-being. Bruce, a man of principle, was appalled not only by Kayla's actions, but also by his son's lack of action. His reaction confirmed what I had hoped. He would not stand by idly. His moral compass and sense of justice made him an unexpected ally in my fight for justice. His anger was palpable, signaling that he would not let this go unanswered. This was a turning point. The true nature of those around me was laid bare, and the stage was set for what would come next. When I shared with Bruce that Henry had dismissed my reports of abuse, claiming it was all in my head, his face said everything. It was a pivotal moment when Bruce realized just how unfairly Kayla had been portrayed. His shock was evident. He couldn't believe I hadn't approached him sooner, but I explained my need to gather undeniable evidence of Kayla's cruelty, fearing that without it, my word would be doubted. Bruce's support came swiftly and sincerely. He apologized for his son's failure to protect me and expressed regret over not intervening sooner. He even gave me his blessing to involve the police, a stance that caught both Kayla and Henry off guard. They had always believed their family's unity would shield them from any external scrutiny. Kayla's desperate plea to Bruce, attempting to paint herself as the victim of an unfair accusation, fell on deaf ears. Bruce's patience had worn thin. He condemned both Kayla and Henry's actions, declaring his intention to divorce Kayla and disown Henry. The stunned silence in the room spoke volumes. Kayla and Henry, who had long manipulated situations for their own benefit, found themselves on the receiving end of a firm, unwavering decision. Bruce's declaration of independence from them was met with approval from the guests, signaling a clear break from the past. To my surprise, Kayla's colleagues, who had witnessed the truth, now stood by me, offering their support. Kayla was left to face the consequences of her actions and the wrath of an irate husband. Her and Henry's final attempts to sway Bruce were futile. Bruce, fueled by undeniable evidence of their wrongdoings, remained resolute. He denounced Henry's greed and cowardice, affirming that I deserved far better than I had received. In a dramatic turn, Bruce prioritized integrity over familial ties, proposing to sever all legal and financial connections with Henry and Kayla. Despite their protests and disbelief, Bruce stood his ground. His stance marked a significant departure from the past, signaling a new chapter of accountability and justice, and paving the way for healing. Even as Kayla and Henry desperately sought forgiveness, Bruce's resolve remained unshaken. The revelation of the extent of Kayla's cruelty was a deal-breaker for him. The shock of discovering how monstrous his wife could be was too much for him to bear. Kayla's reaction to his decision was as if she had been struck by lightning. Henry, teary-eyed, pleaded for forgiveness, ignoring the true victim of their actions, me. The unfolding drama exposed the true priorities of Kayla and Henry. Wealth and social standing far outweighed any sense of basic human decency. Henry's distress over losing his inheritance, rather than the torment inflicted upon his wife, spoke volumes about his character. Kayla, too, resorted to tears, but not in an apology to me. She wept in an attempt to sway Bruce from making his drastic decision, pleading for forgiveness as though the betrayal could be brushed aside as a mere mistake. Their apologies, once directed at me, now rang hollow under Bruce's pointed scrutiny. I couldn't help but recoil from their belated apologies, recognizing them for what they truly were, self-serving attempts to regain control. I made it clear that I would not accept their shallow regrets. Their remorse wasn't born out of genuine contrition, but from the consequences they now faced. With their actions exposed for all to see, they had failed to acknowledge me as a person worthy of respect and kindness until it threatened their comfortable lives. Their pleas for reconciliation, invoking family and forgiveness, were nothing more than empty words. I had grown too much to fall for their deceit again. Their attempts to make amends were too little, too late. I stood firm in my resolve to break free from their toxic influence, knowing I deserved far better than the treatment they had subjected me to. As Kayla and Henry pleaded for forgiveness, calling for a return to our so-called perfect family, I couldn't help but laugh. The irony was striking. In what universe does a perfect family include abuse and neglect of one of its own? Their apologies, self-serving and hollow, felt more like bad jokes. Empowered by the truth of their actions, I faced them with a dismissive smile. You think I'd ever see you as family after everything? You're mistaken. You're just parasites, scared for your future. Well, here's the truth. I don't forgive you. You're nothing to me. And Henry, don't bother with the husband card. I'm divorcing you. That's non-negotiable. Henry's pitiful attempts to justify his actions, claiming it was all in the name of protecting our future, fell on deaf ears. His excuses only underscored his greed and complicity in his mother's cruelty. Bruce, equally disgusted by Henry's behavior, reaffirmed his decision to disown him, declaring that Henry's inheritance was forfeit, regardless of any attempts at reconciliation on my part. Standing my ground, I announced my intention to divorce Henry and claim what was rightfully mine in the settlement, ensuring he was held accountable for his role in this mess. Their continued apologies became mere background noise as I focused on my own resolve. The moment I left, with my friends by my side and Henry halted by Bruce's stern warning, was liberating. I couldn't afford Kayla a final glance. It was time to move on from the toxicity that had trapped me for so long. This departure wasn't just an escape. It was a declaration of my newfound strength and autonomy, a closing chapter on a painful segment of my life, and the beginning of a journey toward healing and self-respect. Eager to erase the memory of Kayla's cruelty, I chose not to involve the police, with Bruce initiating the divorce and disowning Henry. Legal battles seemed unnecessary. They were already facing the consequences of their actions. Bruce had evicted them, and without a prenuptial agreement in Kayla's favor, she had no claim to his wealth. Kayla's misconduct was exposed by her colleagues at the Charity Foundation, leading to her dismissal. Henry lost his position in his father's company and any hope of a significant inheritance, leaving them to consider me, of all people, as their fallback. Given my stable job and finances, Kayla's audacity to seek help from me under the guise of familial bonds was swiftly met with a firm denial and the threat of legal action should they attempt to contact me again. In time, I settled into a new home, navigating the early stages of independence as the divorce proceedings unfolded. Henry, lacking a prenuptial agreement and faced with the undeniable evidence of his and his mother's misdeeds, conceded to the division of his assets with little resistance. Once our divorce was finalized, I invested in a modest apartment, a tangible symbol of my fresh start. Henry's subsequent struggles, juggling multiple jobs to support his uncooperative mother, seemed to him an unjust reversal of fortune. His attempts to reconcile were met with dismissal from me. Their ongoing hardships served as a prolonged retribution, a consequence of their own making. Now, with the dust settled, my life has moved on to a peaceful chapter, mirrored by Bruce's recovery from the ordeal. Henry and Kayla, however, are living out the natural consequences of their actions. It's a fitting resolution to a tumultuous period. This slow burn of a turnaround underscores a profound shift in our fortunes, highlighting the lasting impact of choices and the eventual realization of justice. Hi everyone, my name is Anna. I'm 30 years old, living in San Antonio, Texas, though I'm planning to relocate soon. Life has been a whirlwind recently, as I've just emerged from a difficult marriage that lasted a year and a half. It was a harrowing experience, and I had to rely on my dad and the police to safely leave. I often wonder if I could have avoided that situation had I been more cautious or wise. I've always been quiet and reserved, more comfortable with my computer and the online world than face-to-face interactions. Socializing was never my strong suit, and the thought of strangers approaching me made me anxious. Losing my mom to a heart condition when I was 7 profoundly shaped my life. My dad, a Navy SEAL since he was 25, raised me on his own. His job often took him away for long stretches, but he stayed connected through letters and calls. After my mom passed, my dad came home to find me inconsolable. I remember how hard he worked to comfort me, promising that everything would be okay now that he was back. Still, I could sense his grief, and it was the first time I saw him overwhelmed. When I had a playground accident a few months later, he took a short break from work to stay with me. During that time, he left me in the care of my grandmother, asking her to teach me how to bake and cook my favorite treats. I promised to learn, clinging to the thought of showing my dad what I'd made when he returned. He reassured me before leaving again, saying, "I'll be back in about 7 months. Honey, take care of yourself." True to his word, he sent me gifts and souvenirs from his travels, each one a little story that kept him close despite the distance. Most of my childhood was spent indoors with my grandmother. I preferred the quiet over playing with other children and found solace in my own company. When my dad decided it was time for me to move back to our family home, I struggled with the change. College felt burdensome, and social interactions drained me, but online, I thrived. The digital world became my sanctuary, where I could explore endless stories and connect with people on my terms. In this vast virtual space, I met Brian, a streamer. Our friendship started with text chats and eventually moved to video calls. Though we both chose to stay anonymous, I wore a Batman mask while he opted for a scarf and beanie. "Hi, Anna, it's great to finally see you," he greeted, his tone warm and friendly. "Hello, Brian, nice to meet you, virtually, I replied, my nerves evident. "Likewise. So, how are you doing today? Talk to many people?" he asked with a light chuckle. "I'm okay, just a bit nervous, to be honest," I admitted. "That's completely normal, don't worry, I don't bite. Honestly, I'm probably just as awkward as you are," he reassured me with a grin, easing the tension. Our conversation flowed naturally after that, our shared awkwardness making it easier to open up. "Tell me more about yourself, Brian. How did you find yourself in this online world?" I asked, genuinely curious. And so began a connection built on shared stories and mutual understanding, one small step in navigating the complex journey of human connection. Eager to learn more about the person behind the screen, I leaned into our conversation, finding it marked by mutual understanding and a shared sense of belonging. It was a reminder of the unique connections the digital age makes possible, where even the most reserved individuals can find their place and voice. I've always been fascinated by meeting new people and understanding different viewpoints, I shared, but since I spend so much time at home, the online community has become the perfect avenue to explore those interests. What about you? Well, Brian began, I'm pretty introverted, so face-to-face interactions can be challenging. The online world feels safer, it's easier for me to express myself here. It was comforting to hear his perspective and to realize how meaningful virtual connections could be. The fact that our paths had crossed felt like a small stroke of fate. As we continued talking, exchanging life stories and finding shared interests, I felt myself relaxing. You make this so easy, I admitted, grateful for how naturally the conversation flowed. The feeling's mutual, you're easy to talk to, and I'm glad we met, Brian replied warmly. If you ever want to chat, I'm usually around, probably playing Mario. Oh, do you game? Not really, I said with a small laugh. I spend most of my time blogging and browsing Reddit. There's so much you can learn from the experiences people share there. True, he agreed. Sometimes, reading about others' lives makes me realize how ordinary my own feels. Honestly, I trust my online friends more than the ones I know offline. What I love about online interactions is the freedom. There's no obligation. You can engage or step back whenever you need to. His words struck a chord with me. The freedom of online connections was exactly what made them so special, allowing bonds to form without the pressures of traditional social norms. As our discussions continued, Brian and I built a genuine connection, one that felt as authentic as any friendship forged in person. I couldn't help but feel curious about where this online journey might lead me. One thing was clear. The experiences and lessons I'd gathered from my digital sanctuary had shaped me deeply and would remain a part of who I am as I ventured through life. However, my dad, ever cautious and traditional, would likely disapprove of me forming friendships with people I'd never met in person. The last time he visited, he couldn't resist delivering one of his lectures over dinner. So, how are your studies going, Dove? He asked, his tone as gentle as ever. Dad, I've graduated, I replied, a hint of sadness in my voice. But you wouldn't know that, you couldn't make it. His expression softened. Oh, Anna, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I know I missed it, and I'm truly sorry. I was caught up with work, but please know I regret not being there, Dad said, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. Despite our differences, the bond between us remained strong, a mix of love, concern, and a deep, sometimes challenging understanding. I even sent you an email about your birthday tomorrow, my pumpkin's big day, huh? Dad, stop with the old nicknames. I'm not 9 anymore, I protested, feeling a flicker of embarrassment. In my eyes, you'll always be my little dove, he replied with a soft smile. But let's talk about what's next for you. Have you thought about work? I'm not sure yet, I admitted, uncertainty creeping into my voice. What do you mean, not sure? What are your peers up to these days? He asked, sounding concerned. I don't have any friends, I confessed, the admission making me feel even more isolated. He looked surprised, then sighed. Listen, Anna, I didn't send you to live with your mom's family so you could avoid the world. There's so much out there, so many people to meet. You're missing out by staying in. That's just it, Dad. I don't know how to meet people. I mean, I have friends, but they're all online, I explained, hoping he'd understand. Online, Anna, that's not the best way to make friends, he replied, his concern clear in his voice. Okay, how about this? Let's go out shopping today, just the two of us. It's been ages since we've done that. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, I hesitated, the thought of stepping outside my comfort zone overwhelming. Come on, Anna, you need to try. Staying cooped up isn't good for you. Ever since your mom, Isabella, passed, you've changed, he said gently, trying to encourage me. Why bring mom into this? What are you trying to say? I snapped, a sudden wave of anger surging through me. I'm not trying to upset you, sweetheart, he said calmly. I'm just saying that we need to find ways to move forward despite our loss. But his words only fueled my frustration. I slammed my hand on the table, stood up, and left my meal unfinished. Anna, don't treat your father like that. I'm just trying to help, he pleaded, but I was too upset to listen. You don't understand me at all, so don't even try, I retorted, my emotions boiling over. Frustrated and needing solace, I turned to my online world, where I could chat with Brian. Brian had always been kind and understanding, offering a safe space to share my thoughts and feelings. His words felt like a balm for the storm of emotion swirling within me. In the quiet of my home, with the glow of the computer screen before me, I found a sense of peace. While the world outside continued to move forward, I sought refuge in my digital sanctuary, a place where I could truly be myself without the pressure of face-to-face interactions. But Dad's concerns lingered. Ever since I told him how much of my life revolved around the online world, he'd been encouraging me to take steps outside my virtual bubble. Despite my resistance, I could sense his hope that I'd find a way to reconnect with the world beyond the screen. I knew it would be hard for him to understand. Dad believed that by confining myself to my room, I was limiting my growth and experiences. He urged me to step outside my comfort zone, a thought that triggered my anxiety. I shared my frustrations with Brian, hoping he'd understand my situation. "Hey Anna, would you like to meet up sometime?" Brian asked. "We're both introverts, so we could find a quiet, peaceful place, somewhere not too crowded. I know just the spot." The idea caught me off guard. "I'm not sure. It feels a bit sudden. I need time to think about it," I replied, unsure of myself. "No pressure. Take your time. Whenever you're ready, just let me know. Here's my address. You're always welcome," Brian said, his words filled with patience and understanding. "Why are you so kind to me? I'm practically a stranger," I asked, puzzled by his warmth. "Because I genuinely like you," Brian said, his sincerity striking a chord within me. "I know it might sound odd, but I'd like to get to know you better. Whenever you're ready, you know where to find me." His kindness lingered in my thoughts, and after some time, I decided to take the leap and meet Brian in person. It was a monumental step for me. As I approached his home, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Surprisingly, he lived just a 35-minute drive away. I took a deep breath to muster my courage and knocked on his weathered wooden door. It creaked open to reveal Brian's warm, inviting smile. The instant I saw it, my anxiety melted away. Brian's charm was unexpectedly disarming. His home wasn't extravagant, but it had a cozy, lived-in charm that made me feel at ease. Inside, there were shelves lined with well-loved classic books, a collection of board games, and a well-organized computer space, each piece revealing something about him. "Welcome to my humble abode," he joked, using some gaming lingo I didn't entirely get. I might not catch all the gaming references, but thank you. "Your place is cozy. Do you live here alone?" I asked, stepping into his world. "No, I share it with my mom," he replied, his tone light as he invited me further into his life. His gesture bridged the gap between our online connection and this new, real-world friendship. Brian lived with his mom on the ground floor, while he had the top floor all to himself. He gave me a quick tour of the house, and we spent the whole day talking, getting to know each other better. Meeting in person made our bond feel even stronger, and I appreciated the person I'd come to know online even more. As the evening approached, Brian suggested we take a walk in the nearby park. The idea of being outside in the fresh air relaxed me, and my initial nerves began to fade. Walking with him felt like a natural continuation of our online conversations, but there was a new closeness that only in-person connection could bring. During our walk, I mentioned that I hadn't celebrated my birthday because of a fallout with my dad. Brian was sympathetic and hoped for reconciliation, believing that family ties would eventually heal. But as Brian and I grew closer, a possessive side of him began to show. He insisted on constant communication, getting upset if I spoke to others. Despite his claims of love and protection, his behavior began to feel more controlling than caring. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was caught in a game, and Brian was pulling the strings. The situation was complicated further by his mother's disapproval of our relationship. It hurt knowing she held negative feelings toward me, even though she'd never met me. Her close bond with Brian, though understandable, made me feel like an outsider. What was even more confusing was the contradiction in her behavior. While she disapproved of me, she also seemed to want him to get married, despite knowing I had no one else. It made navigating our relationship and his family dynamics all the more challenging. In a whirlwind of misplaced trust and vulnerability, I found myself swept into a secretive marriage with Brian, driven by his persistence and manipulation. He painted a picture where my father's disapproval and lack of love seemed to justify everything, convincing me that only he truly cared for me. I silently accepted the union, hoping it would become my refuge. Instead, it turned into anything but. As the months went by, a different side of Brian's mother emerged. one that sought to diminish me with her harsh words and actions. At first, I tried to brush off her cruel remarks, thinking they were misunderstandings, and that time would soften her view of me. Unfortunately, her disdain only grew, and she became an incessant source of emotional pain. Whether it was criticizing my cooking, questioning my cleanliness, or belittling my efforts, her goal seemed clear: to make me feel unwelcome and inadequate. Meanwhile, Brian remained detached, lost in his own world, leaving me to endure this torment alone. The isolation deepened my feelings of helplessness, and I started blaming myself. I regretted pushing away my father out of confusion and pride. One particularly difficult day, already weakened by illness, I sought comfort in sleep, only to be cruelly awakened by a splash of cold water. Brian's mother stood over me, her contempt palpable, scolding me for resting instead of doing chores. Then, she slapped me, shocking me into a breaking point. Something inside me snapped. "I'm not doing anything for you or your son anymore. I've had enough," I shouted, my voice trembling with the fury of my refusal to be demeaned any longer. In that moment, I realized I deserved better. It was a step toward reclaiming my sense of self, even amid the wreckage of my decisions. Just as I was about to leave, a sharp pain shot through the back of my head, and everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was in a dimly lit room, with only a single light bulb hanging above. My head throbbed with pain, and when I tried to stand, my legs gave way, sending me crashing to the floor. Confusion and pain overwhelmed me as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. Faint, muffled sounds reached my ears, and I crawled toward the noise. I reached a metal door with a small window. Using it for support, I managed to pull myself to my feet just as the latch clicked open. To my horror, Brian stood in the doorway, a grin plastered across his face. "Is my wife scared of the dark?" he taunted, clearly enjoying my fear. I pleaded with him, begging to be let out, insisting that this cruel joke had gone too far, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. He coldly informed me that this was my punishment for defying his mother. He claimed he would keep me locked away, cutting me off from the world as retribution. The reality of my situation sank in as he mocked me further, pointing out my isolation and lack of family support. His words deepened my despair, but then I felt my phone in my pocket. It was broken, yes, but not completely dead. The screen faintly glowed, offering me a slim chance to call for help. In that dark, cold basement, fear mixed with a surge of resolve. How had my life spiraled into this nightmare, just for standing up to unjust treatment? But amid the despair, the possibility of contacting my dad sparked a tiny glimmer of hope. Memorizing my dad's number, a lifeline I never expected to need, I dialed it with shaking hands, tears blurring my vision. My voice trembled as I recounted the terrifying ordeal, clinging to the hope that he could rescue me from this nightmare. 3 agonizing days passed, and just as despair was beginning to claim me, the sound of a car outside sparked a faint glimmer of hope. My heart raced as I listened for footsteps. The door finally swung open, and there stood my dad, his presence a towering force of reassurance. Relief flooded through me, mingled with disbelief. He had come to my rescue, bringing the police with him. Brian was taken into custody, and his attempts to fabricate excuses fell flat. Their fate in court loomed ominously as they faced the consequences of their actions. "You have no idea what awaits you," my dad said, his voice firm, his disappointment and anger clear. Despite their lies, the truth was undeniable. As we left the dark confines of that basement, I felt a surge of courage. This harrowing experience, though painful, illuminated my strength and my dad's unshakable support. I vowed to stand tall against any future adversities, determined to reclaim my autonomy and voice. Moving to Jacksonville with my dad marked a fresh start, leaving behind the shadows of Texas. This ordeal had taught me a valuable lesson: to be cautious with online connections and the realities behind screens. Though this chapter of my life had closed on a grim note, ahead lay the promise of healing and empowerment, with my dad's steadfast support lighting the way. Life in the urban sprawl as a police officer doesn't just toughen you, it encases you in a shell of skepticism so impenetrable it might as well be Kevlar. That was me, Emma, a 37-year-old former lieutenant turned private detective, lugging around a suitcase of mistrust heavier than the cases I cracked. My daily grind revolved around unfaithful partners and the art of deception, not exactly the setting for a romantic fairy tale. Then Bobby walked into my life, a beacon of modern art in a world full of cynicism, refreshing my reality like a vibrant brushstroke on a fading mural. We met at an art exhibition in Philadelphia. A venue teeming with enthusiasts throwing around terms like postmodern and avant-garde with effortless poise. Feeling out of place, I wandered the gallery like a fish trying to pedal a bicycle. Intriguing piece, isn't it? Bobby's voice cut through my discomfort, his gaze fixed on what appeared to be a strategically arranged heap of junk. If by intriguing, you mean I've seen tidier trash heaps, then absolutely, it's fascinating, I quipped. His laugh was deep and warm. Turning a few heads, he introduced himself, and from that moment, my life took on a new hue. Fast forward 7 months, and I was utterly smitten, caught up in a whirlwind romance that felt surreal. Bobby, with his dapper style and old-world charm, swept me off my feet with poetry readings, art shows, and the kind of attention that made me feel like the only woman alive. Under a starlit sky in Central Park, he proposed, and without hesitation, I said yes, my heart pounding with sheer joy. But every fairy tale has its shadows. Enter Marilyn, Bobby's mother, the epitome of frostiness. Our first dinner together was tense, with Marilyn scrutinizing me as if I were an unworthy intruder in her carefully curated world. A detective? Isn't that a bit unladylike? She asked, her tone sharp. Depends on the century your expectations are anchored in, I replied without missing a beat, earning a tense smile from Bobby. Marilyn's visits became frequent audits of my life. 3 weeks into our marriage, she appeared unannounced. Emma, darling, she began, her voice dripping with condescension, still clinging to that quaint little job of yours? I had hoped marriage would refine you. Slicing vegetables for dinner, I gripped the knife a little tighter. Marilyn, where I come from, we call this earning a living. Maybe you should try it sometime instead of leeching off others. I shot back, keeping my voice steady. Her lips pursed tightly. Bobby was raised with certain expectations. Emma, there's still time for you to find a more suitable career. Like being a full-time meddler? I retorted, thanks, but I'll stick to tracking down cheaters and liars. Speaking of which, how's your bridge club treating you? Bobby walked in just then, his timing impeccable as always. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Your wife was clarifying her career choices for me, Marilyn said, her tone overly sweet. Bobby sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Mom, Emma's career is important to her. It's part of who she is. Turning to me, he pleaded, Emma, let's not do this now, please. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I held back. Fine, I said curtly, returning to the vegetables. After Marilyn's visits, Bobby would retreat into a frustrating silence. It became painfully clear whose side he was on, and it wasn't mine. One evening, after Marilyn criticized everything from my cooking to my housekeeping, I confronted him. Why don't you ever stand up for me? Your mother treats me like I'm invisible, and you just let her. Is this what our marriage is supposed to be? He looked weary. Emma, she's old-fashioned. What do you want me to do? Cut her off? No, I replied, exasperated. I want you to support me, to tell her she can't bulldoze over us. Is that asking too much? I'll talk to her, okay? Just give it time. She'll adjust, he said, raking his fingers through his hair. But she didn't adjust, neither did he. The gap between us grew, fueled by Marilyn's coldness and Bobby's passivity, forming a rift too vast to bridge. Living with Bobby began to feel like starring in a melodrama where the cracks in the perfect facade only widened. His job at a prestigious art gallery sounded impressive, but his earnings were erratic at best. Meanwhile, I was left wondering if this was the love story I had signed up for, or a cautionary tale in disguise. I was doing well, securing a comfortable lifestyle for us in a stylish apartment in a desirable neighborhood. One evening, over dinner, I decided to bring up the future. I'd been thinking, I started, setting my fork down. Eventually, it'd be nice to buy a house, you know, something with enough space if we decide to start a family. Bobby paused, his fork midair, looking at me like I'd just suggested moving to Mars. Emma, where are you getting these ideas? We don't need a house, and me finding a new job? That's not even on the radar. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone even. It's not about needing it, Bobby, it's about planning, stability, thinking ahead. He chuckled, the sound once warm but now grating on my nerves. You and your fixation on money, always crunching the numbers. Money isn't everything, Emma. That laugh, that dismissive laugh, pushed me to the edge. Easy for you to say when you're not the one stressed about paying the bills each month. I shot back, my voice tight. He shrugged, as though brushing away my words. I'm happy with our life as it is. You're the one who's never satisfied. The fork in my hand felt heavier than it should as I placed it on my plate. Maybe I wouldn't be so focused on money if you contributed more than critiques about how I manage it. He didn't even glance up, just kept eating. I contribute in other ways, Emma, not everything is about money. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. It wasn't just about the house, or kids, or finances. It was about respect, partnership, and support, none of which Bobby seemed to value. As long as his life was comfortable, my concerns were dismissed as some misguided obsession with money. On a seemingly ordinary Sunday, the tension in our apartment reached a new peak when Marilyn, my ever-charming mother-in-law, made one of her unannounced visits. The living room became a stage for unexpected drama as I watched her pacing, phone pressed to her ear, her voice wavering between panic and disbelief. "You're telling me my social security number has been suspended?" she exclaimed, fumbling through her purse for her checkbook. "How much do I need to pay to fix this?" From the kitchen, coffee in hand, I overheard the words Social Security and payment, and every instinct honed from years of police work screamed scam. Setting the mug down, I walked briskly into the living room. "Marilyn, hang up, it's a scam," I said firmly but calmly, trying to convey urgency without escalating her panic. She turned to me, eyes wide and face flushed. "I beg your pardon? I'm handling this, Emma, there's no need for your intrusion." I could see she was shaken but too proud to admit it. Before she could press further, I leaned in and said more firmly, "Marilyn, trust me, I've dealt with hundreds of these cases. They're trying to steal from you." Her lips pursed tightly, but she hesitated, phone still in her hand. I reached out gently. "Hang up, and we'll call the real Social Security office together. You'll see." Reluctantly, she ended the call. The tension in the room hung thick as Bobby finally stepped in, his expression torn between annoyance and concern. "Mom, you should have listened to Emma from the start," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. But instead of gratitude, Marilyn's glare shifted to me. "It's always so convenient for her to play the hero, isn't it?" And just like that, the gratitude I'd hoped for evaporated. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the retort on the tip of my tongue, knowing this was a fight that wouldn't be worth winning. I stepped forward, grabbed the phone, and ended the call with a sharp click. The room fell into tense silence. Marilyn recoiled, her face a storm of fury and disbelief. "How dare you?" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "That was incredibly rude and uncalled for. Who do you think you are, treating me like some naive child?" Before I could respond, Bobby appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of concern and frustration. "Emma, what's going on? Why are you upsetting my mother?" I turned to him, frustration bubbling over. "That call was from scammers, Bobby. They were trying to con Marilyn out of her money, claiming her social security number was suspended. It's a common scam, I've seen it countless times." Bobby rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I knew well. It meant he felt caught in the middle. "Okay, but couldn't you have handled it more diplomatically?" Marilyn, her hands trembling as she gathered her belongings, shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't need saving, especially not from someone who treats me so disrespectfully. I'll speak with the bank and see what they say about this so-called scam." She stormed out, leaving a frosty silence in her wake. Bobby sighed, his eyes shifting between the door and me. "Emma, I know you meant well, but you have to handle things more gently, especially with my mother." I felt a pang of guilt but held my ground. "Bobby, I know it seemed harsh, but scammers thrive on urgency. There wasn't time for polite exchanges. Any hesitation could have cost her thousands." The next day, still wrestling with a mix of guilt and curiosity, I called Marilyn. After 3 rings, she answered, her tone cold and measured. "What do you want, Emma?" I cleared my throat. "I just wanted to check on you after yesterday. Did you speak with the bank about the call?" There was a long pause before she replied, her voice reluctant. "Yes, I did. They confirmed it was a scam." Relief washed over me, but her tone quickly hardened. "That doesn't excuse how you handled things. You were rude and aggressive." Pinching the bridge of my nose, I felt a headache building. "I'm sorry if I came across as harsh. I was trying to protect you. These scammers are professionals, they're convincing, and they rely on people hesitating." Her response was curt, though tinged with begrudging acknowledgement. "Well, I suppose I should thank you for stopping me from making a mistake, but don't think this changes my opinion of your methods, or your demeanor. Goodbye, Emma." I saw Bobby's upcoming birthday as a chance to bridge the growing chasm between us, a hopeful opportunity to rekindle the fading spark in our relationship. Carefully, I planned a romantic weekend getaway, envisioning it as a step toward restoring what we once had. But fate, or Marilyn, had other plans. She bulldozed my efforts with her own agenda, scheduling a grand dinner at her mansion on a weekday. Fully aware of my packed work schedule, over the phone, I pleaded, "Can't we move it to Saturday? I'm drowning at work." Her voice was a blend of saccharine sweetness and icy control. "No, dear, this is when it's happening. Bobby shouldn't have to adjust his birthday to fit around your job." Frustration gnawed at me, and I found myself confiding in my boss, the only person who seemed to understand. He'd witnessed more betrayals than most and recognized the importance of the moment. "Go," he urged with a knowing look. "Do what you need to do." When I arrived at Marilyn's, the party was already in full swing, a spectacle of ostentation and pretense. Marilyn spotted me immediately, her smile tightening as she whispered something to Bobby. My eyes followed her line of sight, and there he was, my husband, sitting by the fireplace, his arm draped casually around a woman who was far more than just a colleague. My heart sank, but I steeled myself and approached. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" I asked, trying to sound composed despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. Bobby flinched, his eyes widening in surprise. "Ah, Emma, this is Lori from the gallery," he mumbled, turning awkwardly to the woman. "And this is, Emma, a relative." The word struck like a slap. A relative? Seriously, Bobby? I couldn't contain my incredulity. "Your wife, Bobby, remember?" My voice carried across the room, silencing the hum of conversations. All eyes turned to us. Bobby's face turned red with a mix of embarrassment and irritation. "You know, a real wife would have made her husband's birthday a priority," he shot back, dismissing me with a turn of his shoulder. Before I could respond, Marilyn appeared, her voice oozing disdain. "You see, Emma, you just don't fit in here. Bobby needs someone supportive, like Lori, not, whatever this is." Her words, sharp and deliberate, cut deep. She gestured toward the door with a venomous smile. "I think it's best if you leave. You're not wanted here." I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of dignity I had left. "You know what, Marilyn? Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong in a family that thrives on lies and deception." Without another word, I turned and walked out into the cold night, the chill wrapping around me like the icy aftermath of betrayal. After the disaster at Bobby's birthday and the stark revelations that followed, I knew I needed irrefutable proof to end the marriage on my terms. The thought of investigating Bobby myself felt unbearable. I could handle uncovering secrets about strangers, but not about the man I had once envisioned growing old with. So, I called Alan, a trusted colleague with a knack for uncovering discreet affairs. "Hey, Alan, I need a favor," I said, steadying my voice over the phone. "Anything for you. What's up?" he responded, his loyalty a small comfort in the storm of betrayal. "It's Bobby," I admitted, the words tasting bitter. "I'm sure he's seeing someone. I need evidence." I admitted the truth, my words carrying a mix of relief and dread. "Say no more," Alan said confidently. "I'll handle it discreetly. You'll have everything you need soon." His assurance eased some of my anxiety. True to his word, Alan delivered everything: photos, audio clips, and undeniable proof. Lori wasn't just a colleague, she was in the country illegally, seeking a quick marriage to fix her immigration status while involved in fraud. Part of me wanted to confront Bobby, to throw the evidence in his face and watch him squirm, but then I remembered his condescension, his smug expression, and his blatant dismissal of me. No, he didn't deserve my concern or my help. Filing for divorce was like tearing off a band-aid from a wound that had been festering for far too long. I demanded financial compensation, the bare minimum after his betrayal. The fallout was explosive. Marilyn, ever the dragon lady, stood firmly by Bobby's side, painting me as the villain, but I stood my ground, fueled by both the evidence and the injustice of their accusations. When the ink on the divorce papers dried, it wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a rebirth from the ashes of my life with Bobby. Opening my detective agency wasn't just a dream fulfilled, it was a testament to my resilience. The agency quickly built a reputation for discretion and effectiveness, a reflection of the lessons I had learned through my own struggles. One morning, sunlight streamed into my new office, illuminating the framed license on the wall. Alice, my right-hand woman and confidant, peeked in. "Boss lady, you've got a minute? We've got a potentially big case. A woman suspects her husband of having an affair. She wants surveillance, photos, the works." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Sounds like our bread and butter. Do we have the details?" Alice nodded, placing a file on my desk. Yeah, but there's a catch, she's on a tight budget. I thought for a moment, realizing this was my chance to pay it forward. Tell her we'll work with her budget. And Alice? Let's make sure we're thorough. I know all too well what it's like to be on the other side of this conversation. Alice grinned. Knew you'd say that. You're a good person, you know. I smirked. Try telling that to my ex. As the days passed and the cases piled up, each one felt like a step toward healing. Infidelity, secrets, and lies, these were the patterns I had grown familiar with. Yet, with each closed case, I felt another piece of myself mend. Validation that I had made the right choice to start over. Then one morning, as the city stirred awake, an elderly woman burst into the office, her distress palpable. She argued with my receptionist about her son's wife, who had vanished with a large sum of money, leaving the family in financial ruins. She insisted on speaking to the agency owner and mentioned needing a payment plan. Curiosity piqued. I decided to meet her myself. To my astonishment, I found myself face to face with Marilyn, my former mother-in-law. Recognition flickered across her face before embarrassment set in. Emma, you run this agency? I do, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the swirl of emotions. How can I help? Desperation overtook her shame. You have to help me find her. The woman who ran off with my son's money. Bobby's in shambles. Do it for the family's sake, without charge. Her audacity rendered me momentarily speechless. Marilyn, first, we're not family. Second, I run a business, not a charity for ex-in-laws. Emma, after everything, can't you do this one thing? It's the least you could do, she pressed. I laughed bitterly. The least I could do? Marilyn, after your son cheated on me, you expect me to just forgive and forget? Go to the police. They're better equipped for this. She stood there, flabbergasted, as if the thought of me refusing her had never crossed her mind. Marilyn, I've learned my lesson. Never trust scammers and liars. Maybe it's time you did too. The decision was final. Life, it seemed, had come full circle, but I had no intention of being dragged back into their chaos. A week later, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a number I thought I had erased. Bobby. Against my better judgment, I answered. Bobby, what do you want? Emma, he began, his tone tentative. I've been thinking. I want us to start over. For the kids, you know. I couldn't help but snort. Really? And where would we live in this fantasy of yours? With my mom. At first, he said eagerly. We can save money, then you can buy us a house. It'll be perfect. I laughed, the absurdity of his proposal striking me fully. You think I'd come back to play house with you and your mom, and then foot the bill for a big house? Emma, I've changed, please, he pleaded. Bobby, I said firmly, you haven't changed a bit. Goodbye. As I hung up, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The call, absurd as it was, served as validation. I had grown, I had healed, and I had reclaimed my life. The future lay ahead, bright and brimming with promise. Turning back to my work, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. After all, the best revenge is living well, and I was doing just that. My husband, Brian, whom I supported through thick and thin, was promoted to department head, but then he was taken away by my best friend. He discarded me and the child we had raised together, betraying me as completely as my once trusted friend. It was the lowest point of my life, but thanks to my daughter, who was now an adult starting her career, I managed to recover and move forward. 2 years later, I ran into them unexpectedly in the city. My former best friend sneered as she glanced at the man standing beside me. A poor-looking old man suits you well, she said smugly. I smiled calmly. Good to see you. Don't you recognize me? She looked confused. My ex-husband rushed over. Panicking, I turned to them both and said, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Sarah. Until 2 years ago, I was Sarah Ingram. 2 years ago, my husband Matt, the man I married at 24 after a whirlwind romance, asked me for a divorce. It happened just after he was promoted to department head. I had met Matt when I was a new hire, fresh out of college, and he was my senior colleague and mentor. Not long into our relationship, I discovered I was pregnant. Without hesitation, we decided to marry, and I left my job to focus on our child, Emma, who is now 22 and thriving in her career. I had thought I could finally enjoy the second half of my life with Matt. With Emma grown and independent, we'd have more time for each other, but that hope was shattered on the day Matt came home wearing a distant expression. I had prepared a special dinner to celebrate his promotion. When he sat down, he avoided my eyes. We need to talk, he said gravely. My heart sank, but I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe he wanted to talk about our future now that his career was stable. I had imagined he might thank me for my years of support or even surprise me with plans for a vacation. Instead, his words cut through me like a knife. I want a divorce. I've fallen in love with someone else. I was stunned. For years, I had supported him, raising Emma largely on my own while he chased his ambitions. I believed him every time he said he was busy with work dinners or business golf. I hadn't seen any signs of his betrayal. My life revolved around our family, and I thought I could rely on his gratitude and loyalty. But instead, Matt left me for my best friend. They both betrayed the trust one had placed in them. Alone and heartbroken, I struggled to rebuild my life. It was Emma who kept me going, her strength and determination inspiring me to move forward. Now, 2 years later, as I stood face to face with them in the city, I felt nothing but calm. The man next to me, a kind and supportive partner, smiled as I introduced myself anew. My ex-husband and former friend looked shaken, but I was unbothered. I had already reclaimed my life. I chose not to complain and supported Matt from behind the scenes. I had witnessed firsthand the challenges he faced after our unexpected pregnancy and my decision to resign from work. One of Matt's superiors once said, "He's a rookie with a slow work pace, but he sure knows how to get a woman pregnant fast." That stung both of us deeply. Matt faced constant criticism, and not all of our colleagues supported our decision to get married. Despite this, he endured the judgment and worked tirelessly to prove himself. His dedication eventually paid off with an early promotion to department head. I wanted to ensure his success reflected well on both of us. I went out of my way to choose thoughtful gifts for his bosses and their families, even when it took extra effort. At company events, I smiled politely, aware I was being judged for leaving work early or stepping away from my career. I didn't mind. I did all of it because I believed in him and wanted to see him succeed. But rather than thank me for my unwavering support, Matt delivered the ultimate betrayal. Until the day he asked for a divorce, I hadn't suspected for a moment that Matt was having an affair. Was I foolish? Had I been blind to the signs? I had to know the truth, no matter how painful. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice trembling. Perhaps it was just an infatuation, and he wasn't serious about ending our family. Matt hesitated before responding. "You know her. She's someone close to you." My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. Was it a former coworker? One of Emma's friends? That idea felt too absurd, too inappropriate. It would make Matt look creepy. Could it be one of the families we knew through Emma's activities, like swimming or ballet? But Matt rarely participated in those events. He didn't even drive Emma to her lessons. "Just tell me," I said, my patience wearing thin. He sighed and shouted, "It's Michelle." Michelle? The name struck me like a blow. Michelle had been my best friend since childhood, the person I trusted most. We'd shared everything, our joys, our struggles, and even our families. When Matt and I got engaged, Michelle had asked me to introduce her to one of Matt's friends. She later married him, and they had a daughter, Jessica, who was 3 years younger than Emma. For years, we bonded over parenting, organizing barbecues, and sharing advice. I had never imagined she would betray me like this. Memories of Michelle flooded my mind. Once, when I was holding on to some of Emma's outgrown clothes, Michelle had joked, "Holding on to these things like this? That's the sign of a toxic parent. It's just stuff. Sarah, you need to let go, or you'll be that kind of mom." Her words had stung, but I took them to heart and tried to be less sentimental. Later, I gave Michelle some of Emma's old clothes and toys as hand-me-downs. However, I struggled to part with one item, Emma's preschool uniform. It held too many memories of her first year of school. I lied to Michelle, saying I might need it for another child, and asked her to return it once Jessica was done with it. Michelle's marriage didn't last, and by the time Jessica was in kindergarten, she and her husband divorced. When she handed me back the preschool uniform, I was relieved to have it again, even though it was worn and patched. But her words stung as she handed it over. "Must be nice to be a housewife." "Huh, Sarah, I'm still dating, but as a single parent, I can't give Jessica a sibling." At the time, Michelle hadn't shared the details of her marital problems. I empathized with her struggles, but I was also dealing with my own disappointments. I had wanted a second child, but Matt's long hours and lack of interest left no room for that discussion. I let go of that dream, feeling grateful that I was better off than Michelle in some ways. But now, hearing Matt utter her name, the betrayal felt unbearable. Michelle, who once accused me of still dating my own husband, had stolen him from me. "The guy you introduced me to left me for another woman, Sarah," she had once said bitterly. I hadn't denied it then, only smiled sympathetically. I never imagined she would turn around and do the same thing to me. Michelle picked a fight with me not long after her divorce. It all started because she'd asked me to introduce her to someone I barely knew, her now ex-husband. When I first met him, Michelle was immediately drawn to his looks and made it her mission to pursue him. I had advised her to take things slow and really get to know him, but she didn't listen. Later, when her marriage fell apart, she blamed me. I was confused but sympathetic, recognizing she needed a friend to lean on during a tough time. I didn't hold it against her. After her divorce, I tried to support Michelle and her daughter, Jessica, however I could. I even registered as Jessica's emergency contact at her daycare. If Jessica got sick and Michelle couldn't leave work, I'd pick her up, take her to the doctor, and look after her until Michelle was free. I adjusted my part-time work schedule to be there for Jessica when she started middle school, as she spent afternoons at my house instead of daycare. It wasn't easy, but I wanted to help. When my own daughter, Emma, graduated from elementary school and moved on to middle school, my life took a turn. A clerk at my part-time job got married and relocated, and my company offered me a full-time position. Matt, my husband, supported the idea of increasing our household income, and Emma was on board too. After years of focusing on family, I was excited to take on this new chapter. However, working full-time meant I couldn't continue looking after Jessica after school. Michelle and I had to adjust. Jessica began coming home to an empty house, but I figured it wasn't my responsibility anymore. Life moved on. Over the next 9 years, Michelle and I saw less of each other. Although we didn't meet as often as we had when our daughters were young, I still considered her my best friend. Then, one day, Matt's unexpected words shattered that illusion. I want a divorce. I'm in love with Michelle. His declaration hit me like a ton of bricks. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it had to be some kind of joke. You're kidding, right? Michelle is my best friend. But Matt's expression was deadly serious. I know she's your best friend, but I've fallen for her. I can't help how I feel. I stared at him, stunned. How could a 49-year-old man with a 22-year-old daughter speak so childishly? It felt like I was trapped in some absurd soap opera. So it's just your crush, right? Michelle would never betray me. Desperate for clarity, I called Michelle. She picked up immediately. Michelle, can you come over? Matt's saying some crazy things. But instead of laughing it off, Michelle chuckled. Oh, I already know. Matt told me he was asking you for a divorce today. You knew? My heart sank. You've been talking to him? Her voice was cheerful, almost gleeful. Yes, Sarah, I'm sorry, but Matt's in love with me now. He wants to divorce you and marry me. The world seemed to spin. This had to be a cruel joke. My husband and my best friend conspiring together? It was too much to believe. Matt left the room muttering something about going out for a smoke, something he hadn't done since I was pregnant. When had he started again? When he returned, he wasn't alone. Michelle walked in beside him, and they both looked resolute. Sarah, I'm really sorry, Matt began, but we've confirmed our feelings for each other. Michelle is the right partner for me now. Despite her words of apology, Michelle's smirk was unmistakable. I couldn't help but snap. Didn't you already have a boyfriend, Michelle? You always did, even after your divorce. And some of them supported you financially. Her expression hardened. Sarah, don't bring that up in front of Matt. Those boyfriends were just temporary. The truth is, I've always loved Matt. She even mustered fake tears, putting on a melodramatic display. To my shock, Matt reached out and stroked her hair tenderly. Sarah, don't blame Michelle, he said softly, as if this betrayal was something I simply needed to accept. It was like Matt wanted to cast himself as some tragic hero in this ridiculous drama. Watching him and Michelle, I could hardly believe these people were real. My heart shattered as tears rolled silently down my cheeks. I whispered, since when? We've been meeting in secret for a long time, Michelle admitted shamelessly, but we only started talking seriously about marriage after Matt's promotion was confirmed. I felt like a fool. I had trusted them both, and now it was clear they had been betraying me behind my back. Michelle must have seen Matt's promotion as an opportunity to improve her own life and latched onto the idea of marriage. Her arrogance was unbearable. So now that you know, hurry up and divorce him already, she said, smirking. Her attitude made my tears feel ridiculous. I forced myself to respond, fine, I'll divorce him, but I couldn't resist asking, what about Jessica? Does she know? Don't ignore your daughter's feelings. At the mention of Jessica, Matt's face briefly registered guilt. He dropped his gaze. Jessica turned 18 and moved out. She's no longer my responsibility, he muttered. Then, astonishingly, he added, it's probably your fault she turned out so defiant. considering how much time she spent with you. Their callousness was staggering. I hadn't spoken to Jessica in some time, so I hadn't even known she had moved out. When Matt produced the divorce papers, with Michelle's signature already on the guarantor section, I couldn't muster the energy to argue. Seeing that grotesque document, I agreed to the divorce on the spot. Matt packed his things and moved out to live with Michelle. I never thought Michelle would have the audacity to treat my husband like one of my daughter's hand-me-down clothes. Yet here we were. When Emma returned from her business trip the next day, I told her everything. Her reaction was sharper than I expected. "That man isn't my father anymore," she said firmly. "And Michelle? She's the worst person I've ever known." Her words startled me, but I saw how strong Emma had become. I had worried she would be deeply hurt, but she handled the news better than I had imagined. Even so, her anger burned hot. "Have you talked to Jessica?" I asked. "I'm worried she might be struggling." "Mom, stop worrying about other people and start thinking about yourself," Emma said, her eyes brimming with tears. Seeing her so raw and vulnerable, I realized she had suffered more than she let on. I hugged her, something we hadn't done in years. I vowed to be a better parent, someone Emma could truly be proud of. 2 years passed without a word from Matt or Michelle. Emma thrived in her new independence, and we saw no reason to reach out to her father. Michelle had moved far away after marrying Matt, and our paths never crossed until one fateful evening. After attending a play, I ran into them in the city by chance. Our eyes met, and I couldn't avoid them. Michelle's mocking voice cut through the air. "A poor-looking old man suits you," she sneered, glancing disdainfully at the man beside me. I didn't take the bait. I had just enjoyed a lovely evening with my new boyfriend, Jonathan. He and I had been watching the play together. Instead of responding to her insult, I shot her a level look. "Good to see you, Michelle. Don't you recognize him?" Michelle's smug expression faltered, and she stared at Jonathan in disbelief. Matt looked equally stunned. "Wait, you're Jonathan?" Matt stammered. Jonathan had been Matt's senior at the company, mentoring him when he first started. He had once taken the fall for a mistake Matt made, which had cost Jonathan his job. I hadn't known this back then, but we reconnected recently through a mutual acquaintance. That's how we had started dating. Michelle's face twisted as she remembered. I had once introduced Jonathan to her as a potential partner, but she had rejected him, saying he was too old and not stylish enough. Now, Jonathan looked different, his appearance more polished and refined. Michelle's disdain for anything understated had blinded her to his true worth. Jonathan spoke calmly but firmly. "Relax, Michelle. It's not a big company, and my income isn't huge, but starting my own business worked out for the best." Michelle's eyes widened in horror. "What? He's a CEO?" she blurted, her crassness on full display. "If I'd known that, I wouldn't have married Matt. He's so cheap." Her outburst only made me pity her more. Jonathan, ever composed, simply shrugged. "It's not about titles, Michelle. It's about character." Just then, I noticed Emma and Jessica standing nearby. Having overheard the scene, guilt tugged at me. They shouldn't have had to witness this embarrassment, yet their expressions were resolute. "Still relying on men after all these years," Emma said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "When will you ever learn?" Michelle turned, startled, and suddenly adopted a parental tone. "Jessica, Emma, how have you been?" But their daughters weren't buying it. Jessica, standing tall, spoke with quiet strength. "I loved you once, Mom, but after the divorce, you moved us around and dated random men. It made me uncomfortable and ashamed. I used to wish Miss Sarah was my mom." Her words pierced my heart. I hugged her tightly, feeling a bond stronger than ever before. Jonathan's voice broke the tension. "Come on, let's leave these foolish people behind and go have a nice meal." We walked away, leaving Matt and Michelle to their hollow lives. Later, I learned from an old classmate that they had divorced. Matt had finally reached his breaking point after Michelle repeatedly belittled him. Emma and Jessica grew closer, like true sisters. Jonathan eventually proposed, and I accepted. Looking back, I realized my first marriage had been a mistake, but it had led me to where I belonged. Together, Jonathan, Emma, Jessica, and I are building a new life, filled with love and laughter. I am Monica, 26 years old, and I work as a web designer, growing up in a small rural town with my grandparents, parents, and younger sister Linda. Life was far from fair. My sister, 7 years my junior, was the apple of everyone's eye. Her opinions were always prioritized, leaving me feeling neglected and unimportant. The favoritism was blatant. On Linda's birthdays, she received lavish gifts, while mine, close to Christmas, were combined into a single occasion, marked with practical gifts like books I had no interest in. When Linda started playing soccer, our parents were her biggest supporters, never missing a game or practice. In contrast, when I played my final tennis match in middle school, they were too busy driving Linda somewhere to attend. This pattern of disparity defined my childhood, fostering a growing sense of inadequacy and loneliness. Still, Linda wasn't blind to the injustice. She often stood up for me when our parents compared us harshly. "Monica is good at studying and teaching. She can do anything," she'd say. After my last tennis match, she even handed me a bouquet of flowers she had picked herself, whispering, "Good job." Our grandparents, too, tried to intervene on my behalf, reprimanding my parents for their behavior. But when my grandmother passed away, and soon after my grandfather, any buffer against my parents' criticism dissolved. Linda continued to support me for a while, but as my mother began targeting her with the same harshness, she eventually stopped. "If you're always going to side with your sister, you might as well stand outside too," my mother would sneer. To protect Linda, I told her to stop defending me. From then on, Linda focused on excelling in sports and academics, becoming the daughter my parents could proudly praise. Meanwhile, our parents' finances took a hit after the funerals, and they informed me there was no money for college. My dream of studying design at university was crushed. Instead, I graduated high school and took a job at a small design company far from home. There, I worked tirelessly, starting as an office assistant but seizing every opportunity to learn from the designers. My passion for web design kept me going, and I spent weekends studying online courses to build my skills. 3 years later, I was promoted to the design team, and 5 years after that, I became a full-fledged web designer, trusted with leading projects. During this time, I rarely returned home. Visiting only brought back the sting of my parents' disapproval, so I focused entirely on my career. 8 years after high school, I received unexpected news. Linda was preparing for university entrance exams, aiming for a prestigious medical school in the city. Despite everything, I felt proud of her. When she was accepted into her first choice school, I congratulated her warmly. "Linda, congratulations, you've worked so hard, and I admire your dedication." She thanked me, her voice tinged with embarrassment, but soon revealed a concern. "The school suggested a donation. It's not mandatory, but Mom and Dad are worried about how it would look if we don't contribute. With tuition and living expenses already being so high, they don't know what to do." Linda planned to cover her living expenses with part-time work, but I could see the strain medical school would impose. My parents, unable to afford the donation, had pushed Linda to ask me instead of approaching me themselves. Their audacity left me stunned. Even though I resented their actions, I couldn't ignore Linda's predicament. I decided to support my sister, covering the donation and entrance fees so she could begin her new life at university. Linda moved into an apartment near the campus, and since it wasn't far from where I lived, I thought she could rely on me if she ever needed help. However, as she became immersed in college life, her responses to me grew increasingly curt. I'd get messages like, "I want to eat this," or, "I need this, please buy it for me," and I would arrange whatever she needed, supporting her in ways she couldn't ask of our parents. Occasionally, we'd meet for a meal, but even then, she remained distant, engrossed in her smartphone rather than engaging with me. When I tried to talk about her studies or lighten the mood, she'd brush me off, complaining that studying was hard. Her demeanor left me bewildered. At one such dinner, I tried to steer the conversation with a light-hearted comment. "Mom and Dad probably only care about you, though," I said, smiling, but Linda suddenly stared at me with an icy expression and snorted. "Of course, a medical student like me and a high school graduate designer like you are incomparable. No one cares about a job that doesn't even need qualifications like yours." Her words felt like a slap. "There's no need to say it like that," I replied, stunned. Linda rolled her eyes. "It's the truth. Being a designer is just a title. Anyone can make a website if they look it up online. You'd probably be better off getting a real qualification, but that's hard for someone who only graduated high school." I tried to defend myself. "It's not that simple. I'm studying and working hard every day. You shouldn't judge without understanding." Linda dismissed me with a displeased glance and clicked her tongue. "Dad and Mom are right. They say you're a disappointment, someone who couldn't even go to college. I'm only here because they told me to watch over you and make sure you don't fall any lower." I froze, her words sinking in like stones. Memories of my parents comparing us since childhood rushed back. Linda is smart, kind, and dependable, while Monica is stupid, clumsy, and can't do anything. I lowered my head, feeling like I couldn't breathe. Seeing me bow my head, Linda mistook my silence for tears and smirked. "I'm going home now," she said briskly and left. Living on her own had transformed Linda. Surrounded by exceptional people and showered with praise from our parents, she fully believed in the image they painted of her as a prodigy destined to be a top doctor. Meanwhile, their disdain for me was reflected in her tone and attitude, as though she had absorbed their judgment entirely. That winter, as usual, I returned home for the holidays. My parents had asked me to come back with Linda, who hadn't visited since starting university. When we arrived, it was clear who the focus of their attention was. The table was piled high with steak, pizza, and treats to celebrate her visit. That evening, neighbors, relatives, and even Linda's old classmates gathered for a grand party. Linda basked in the attention, boasting loudly about her life at university. "Mom keeps asking me to come home more often, but you know how tough it is at the country's most prestigious medical school. I can't just lead my team projects or relax at home. People are always contacting me about something, and it's exhausting." I busied myself in the kitchen, avoiding the spotlight, but I could hear her voice dominating the conversation. To the parents and relatives, her boasting seemed fine, but to the neighbors and classmates, it must have sounded grating. When I brought out a tray of wine, an elderly neighbor tried to shift the attention to me. "Monica, aren't you working in design?" Before I could respond, Linda and my parents cut in. "You can't really say much about her. She's trying, but she didn't even go to college. She's such a disappointment," my mother said bluntly. The room fell awkwardly silent. Many of those present hadn't gone to college themselves and were raising families or working hard, but they refrained from contradicting her. Only my parents and Linda seemed oblivious to the discomfort. Feeling humiliated, I tried to slip away, but Linda stopped me. "You still come home a lot, don't you, Monica? I guess you don't think about anything. Maybe that's why you're so bold," she said, laughing loudly. Our parents joined in, laughing as if it was all a joke. "If you say that much, Linda, it'll hurt her feelings. Poor Monica," my father added mockingly. My anger boiled over. I clenched my fists and managed to squeeze out, "It's better if I don't come back next year." "I get it." Relatives and neighbors looked at me with concern, but I ignored them, putting down the tray and grabbing my coat and bag. Linda smirked as I prepared to leave. "I understand. Don't bother coming back again," she said with a wave, and my parents echoed her sentiment with casual indifference. Heart pounding with anger and sorrow, I stepped out into the cold night, leaving behind the people who had so thoroughly dismissed me. I didn't look back. As I headed to the station, I fought to suppress the storm of emotion swirling within me. Returning home always left me with a heavy heart. When I was aspiring to be a web designer, I could use my studies as an excuse to distance myself from my parents, but as I grew older and advanced in my career, I found it harder to sever ties completely. The lingering sense of familial obligation weighed on me, even as I struggled to reconcile the disappointment and anger I felt toward them. Linda was still a university student, young and inexperienced in the realities of working life. Perhaps that's why she couldn't grasp how much effort it took to navigate society independently. I told myself that our parents had likely done their best in their own way to raise their children. Still, it was undeniable that they had spent years putting Linda on a pedestal, praising her as a genius while adopting a condescending attitude toward me. That winter, Linda's terrible behavior during our family gathering solidified my resolve. I realized that if I truly valued my own work and self-respect, I couldn't continue this toxic relationship, even with my own family. It was in that moment I decided to cut ties for good. Months passed after that decision. One day, I received an unexpected call from Linda. When I didn't answer, she persistently left messages, urging me to pick up. Reluctantly, I finally answered. "Did you pay my tuition properly?" Linda's voice carried a mixture of urgency and entitlement. I responded calmly. "I paid the donation and the entrance fee before you enrolled. What about this year's tuition?" "The university is asking for it urgently," she replied. "I don't know anything about that," I said. Even over the phone, I could sense Linda's discomfort. Indeed, I had drained my savings to cover her initial costs, the entrance fee, donation, and tuition for her first year. Those expenses had almost depleted my finances at the time, and I'd planned to pay subsequent fees as they came due. But after the incident at the end of the year, it was inconceivable that they would expect me to continue supporting Linda, especially after being told not to come home. "I paid the donation because I wanted to support you," I said firmly. "Didn't Mom and Dad send you to an out-of-state private university because they could afford the tuition? Or did they do it knowing they didn't have the money?" "That's not it," Linda stammered. I have wealthy friends, so there are other expenses, besides tuition and living costs. Mom and Dad somehow managed those, but now they don't have the money for tuition. That's why they told me to contact you. It all made sense. My parents had likely counted on my financial support from the start, especially after I advanced in my career. I had moved to a major design firm, where my skills were recognized, and my salary had increased significantly, while I had saved diligently. My support for Linda was meant to be temporary, not a permanent obligation. From the sound of it, the savings meant for her education had been squandered on her leisure activities. Despite this, I no longer had the emotional capacity to forgive. Helping with the tuition wouldn't have been financially difficult, but I refused. A few days later, my parents called, demanding I pay Linda's tuition. Their accusatory tone only deepened my resentment. It was clear that they didn't see me as part of the family, only as a source of money. Their lack of respect and consultation made it impossible for me to comply. Linda began calling almost daily. Her messages were filled with self-centered pleas. Please pay the tuition. If you don't, I'll be expelled. Scholarships and part-time jobs aren't enough. It would be a waste if someone as promising as me had to leave school. I'll pay you back when I start working. Just help me. As family. She even left absurd messages like, if you're upset because they told you not to come home, I can try persuading Mom and Dad. I saved her messages in a separate file, then deleted everything else and blocked her number. No one deserves to be treated as a doormat just because they're family. After that, I completely cut off communication with them. A relative later told me that Linda managed to secure scholarships and loans to cover her second year's tuition. However, without financial support for living expenses, she had to work part-time. Balancing work with her studies proved too difficult, and she ended up failing several courses. Eventually, she dropped out of university altogether. With no other options, Linda returned to live with our parents, but with their finances drained, there was no money to consider transferring her to another school. She didn't seek work locally either. Instead, she became reclusive, spending her days immersed in video games and lashing out at night in fits of stress. A friend who lived nearby later told me that the sounds of family arguments could be heard regularly from their house. My parents, once so proud of Linda, seemed powerless to confront her. As time went on, things only worsened. My father, under immense stress, caused a scandal while commuting to work. He was accused of groping a woman on the train, and though the case was settled without charges, he resigned in shame. My mother, who had little work experience, struggled to find a job that could sustain the family. They occasionally tried to contact me through relatives, but their messages were always the same, demanding and unapologetic. Eventually, even the relatives lost patience. We'll handle it here. Don't worry, they told me, cutting off any further attempts at communication. I heard through the grapevine that Linda and my father, both unemployed, were living in near destitution. My mother, frustrated and overwhelmed, had disappeared entirely, leaving them to fend for themselves. Without any goodwill left in the neighborhood, help from others was non-existent. Meanwhile, my life had taken a different path. My career as a designer flourished. I was invited to join a major project that would leave my name known in the industry. With the project wrapping up and my savings secure, I decided to pursue a long-held dream, taking university entrance exams. Now, I plan to study business management, with the goal of going independent in the future. For the first time in years, my heart is racing with excitement for the challenges ahead. I never imagined my wedding day would be the beginning of my greatest nightmare. The moment I walked down the aisle, glowing in my carefully chosen white gown, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as I soon learned, are only stories. Reality is far more cruel. My husband, Ethan, had always been charming. His smile could light up a room, and his words carried a warmth that made you feel like you were the center of the universe. That's what drew me to him in the first place. But standing there at the altar, I couldn't shake the icy glances from his mother, Vivian, and his older sister, Lila. They sat in the front row, whispering to each other as if sharing some inside joke. My stomach twisted. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. The reception was lavish, Vivian's doing, of course. She loved to flaunt her wealth and influence. As I greeted the guests, I noticed how Vivian's friends looked me up and down, their smiles polite but their eyes sharp, assessing. "She's lovely," one woman said to Vivian, loud enough for me to hear, "but she's simple, isn't she?" Vivian's response was a laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Yes, well, not everyone can be extraordinary. I clenched my fists, determined to ignore the sting. This was my wedding day. I refused to let her ruin it. But the real blow came later that night during the first dance. Ethan's family had gathered around, clapping and cheering, but their smiles were laced with mockery. As Ethan twirled me under the lights, I overheard Lila whisper to a cousin, "She doesn't belong here. She's out of her depth." The words pierced me like a knife. My dream day was unraveling. When Ethan and I finally escaped to our hotel suite, I confronted him. "Your family, they don't like me, do they?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't let them get to you, Kate. They're just protective." Protective? They were mocking me, Ethan. Right there in front of everyone. He kissed my forehead, his tone dismissive. "You're overthinking it. Let's just enjoy tonight." But I couldn't enjoy it. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they would only grow in the weeks to come. Married life with Ethan was a mix of bliss and bitterness. He was sweet when we were alone, but when his family was around, he transformed into someone else entirely. Vivian's subtle jabs became a daily occurrence, always wrapped in a guise of concern. "Kate, dear," she said one evening during a family dinner, "have you thought about taking etiquette classes? It's just, well, our circles can be quite demanding, and I wouldn't want you to feel out of place." Lila smirked over her glass of wine. "Oh, Mother, don't overwhelm her. She's doing her best, after all." I looked to Ethan for support, but he only gave me a strained smile, his eyes darting away. The breaking point came during a charity gala. Vivian had insisted I attend, even though I felt like a fish out of water among the glittering gowns and polished smiles. As I stood awkwardly by the bar, I overheard Vivian speaking to a group of donors. "She's sweet," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "but honestly, I expected Ethan to choose someone more refined." Laughter erupted from the group, and my face burned with humiliation. When I confronted Ethan that night, his response was infuriating. "They don't mean anything by it," he said, brushing off my tears. "You're taking it too personally." Despite everything, I tried to fit in. I took Vivian's advice, attending etiquette classes and investing in designer clothes, hoping to earn their approval. But nothing was ever enough. Every effort I made was met with more criticism. One evening, as I sat alone in our apartment, staring at a photo from our honeymoon, something inside me snapped. Why was I bending over backward for people who clearly despised me? Why wasn't Ethan standing up for me? I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. From that moment of realization, my resolve hardened. I wasn't going to let Vivian, Lila, or anyone else in Ethan's family dictate how I lived my life, or how I felt about myself. If they wanted me to fail, I would give them the fight of their lives. But I quickly learned that standing up to them would come with devastating consequences. My first act of defiance was at a family brunch Vivian hosted at her sprawling estate. The theme was old Hollywood glamour, and I arrived dressed to the nines in a sleek black gown with vintage pearls, channeling Audrey Hepburn. When I walked through the door, all heads turned, and for a moment, I thought I'd won a small victory. Vivian's smile was tight. "Oh, Kate, you made it. I wasn't sure you'd understand the theme." I returned her smile, equally icy. "I never miss an opportunity to shine." Lila snorted into her mimosa, but I ignored her. As the brunch progressed, I held my ground, participating in conversations with poise and confidence. I could see their discomfort, Vivian's forced laughter, Lila's exaggerated eye rolls, but I felt empowered for the first time. Until, of course, they retaliated. After the meal, Vivian pulled me aside, her tone sweet but her words venomous. "I know you're trying, dear, but perhaps it's best to let the more seasoned women handle the social dynamics. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself, or Ethan." Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. "Thank you for the advice, Vivian," I said, my voice steady. "But I think I'll manage just fine." The conflict with Vivian and Lila wasn't just between us, it seeped into my marriage. Ethan hated confrontation, and instead of supporting me, he retreated into silence. One night, after another heated dinner with his family, I confronted him. Why won't you say anything to them? I demanded, pacing our living room. They humiliate me, Ethan. In front of you, in front of everyone, and you just sit there, he sighed, rubbing his temples. What do you want me to do, Kate? They're my family, and what am I? I shot back, my voice cracking. Am I not your family too? His silence was deafening. It became clear that I was on my own. Things escalated at Ethan's company gala, an event I had been dreading but couldn't avoid. Vivian and Lila were, of course, in attendance, along with the elite of the business world. I had meticulously prepared, wearing an elegant emerald gown and practicing conversation starters to hold my own. For most of the evening, I managed to avoid them. But as I stood by the buffet, chatting with one of Ethan's colleagues, I heard a familiar voice. She's charming, isn't she? Vivian's tone was syrupy sweet, but her words were daggers. It's just a shame she doesn't quite understand our world. Poor thing, she's trying so hard, Lila chimed in, her laughter sharp. It's like watching a child play dress up. My heart sank as I realized they were talking about me. Worse, the colleague I was speaking to excused himself awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle Vivian and Lila were making. I couldn't take it anymore. Turning on my heel, I marched straight to their table. Is there something you'd like to say to me directly? I demanded, my voice trembling but firm. The room fell silent. Vivian looked up at me with feigned surprise. Kate, dear, what are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, my hands clenched. You've been undermining me since the day I married Ethan. I'm done pretending it doesn't bother me. Lila smirked. Oh, sweetie, don't take things so personally. It's all in good fun. Fun? I echoed, my voice rising. Tearing someone down for your own amusement is fun to you? Before they could respond, I turned to Ethan, who had been standing frozen by the bar. And you, I said, my voice breaking, are you really going to just stand there and let this happen? He looked at me helplessly, his silence cutting deeper than any insult Vivian or Lila could throw. Humiliated and furious, I left the gala, ignoring Ethan's weak protests as I stormed out. The weeks that followed were a blur of arguments and cold shoulders. Ethan tried to apologize, but his words felt hollow. The rift between us widened with each passing day. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, a headline caught my eye: Family feud at high society gala, daughter-in-law causes scene. My heart sank as I read the article, complete with quotes from anonymous attendees describing me as overly emotional and out of place. It didn't take a genius to figure out who had leaked the story. Furious, I confronted Ethan. Your family has crossed a line, I said, shoving the article in his face. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? He looked at the article and sighed. Kate, you shouldn't have confronted them like that. You know how they are. I stared at him, incredulous. You're blaming me? They humiliated me, Ethan, publicly, and now they're spreading lies about me to the media. I'll talk to them, he said weakly, but I knew he wouldn't. For the first time, I started to wonder if I had made a mistake marrying him. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, an unexpected lifeline appeared in the form of Ethan's younger brother, Adam. Unlike the rest of the family, Adam had always been kind to me, but he mostly kept to himself, avoiding the drama that surrounded Vivian and Lila. One afternoon, he called me out of the blue. I heard about the gala, he said, his voice sympathetic. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how they treated you. It's not right. His words brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Adam, that means more than you know. You don't deserve this, Kate, he continued, and you're not alone. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. In the weeks that followed, Adam's words lingered in my mind. I had been so consumed by Vivian and Lila's hostility, by Ethan's passivity, that I hadn't considered I might have allies, even within their family. That small spark of hope was enough to keep me going, though I wasn't sure where it would lead. It started with a conversation I didn't realize I needed. Adam invited me for coffee, a rare gesture that I accepted with hesitation. We met at a cozy cafe on the edge of town, far removed from the world of high society luncheons and gala drama. I don't get it, I admitted after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Why are you sticking your neck out for me? You're Vivian's son too. Adam stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You're right, I am, but I'm also tired of seeing her treat people like pawns in her game. You're not the first person she's tried to tear down, but you're the first one who stood up to her. His words both comforted and unsettled me. I don't feel like I'm standing up to her. Most days, it feels like I'm barely holding on. That's because you're fighting alone, he said simply. You shouldn't have to. Adam's support emboldened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Together, we began to strategize ways to reclaim my dignity and stand up to Vivian and Lila. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about drawing boundaries and demanding respect. You can't play their game, Adam advised during one of our many conversations. They'll always have the upper hand, but you can change the rules. How? I asked, skeptical but intrigued. By showing them they can't control you. Start by building your own network, your own reputation. Show them, and Ethan, that you don't need their approval. It was a daunting idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had been so focused on fitting into their world that I had lost sight of my own strengths. It was time to change that. The first step was reconnecting with who I was before I met Ethan. I dusted off my old portfolio and began freelancing as a graphic designer, a career I had put on hold after our wedding. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my confidence, landing a few small but meaningful clients. Vivian and Lila, of course, caught wind of my efforts and wasted no time belittling them. Oh, how quaint, Lila remarked at a dinner party. A little hobby to keep you busy. I smiled sweetly, refusing to take the bait. Actually, it's a full-time career, and it's going quite well. Thank you. Their barbs didn't sting as much anymore. I was learning to see them for what they were, insecure, manipulative women who thrived on making others feel small. But the real turning point came during yet another family gathering, a charity event Vivian was hosting at her estate. Adam had encouraged me to attend, not to prove anything to them but to myself. The evening started predictably enough, with Vivian and Lila playing their usual games of thinly veiled insults and backhanded compliments. But things escalated when Vivian, in a theatrical show of generosity, announced a sizable donation to the charity on behalf of the entire family. She then turned to me with a saccharine smile. Kate, dear, would you like to say a few words on behalf of Ethan and yourself? It was a trap, and I knew it. If I declined, I'd look ungrateful. If I accepted, I'd be stepping into her spotlight. But this time, I was ready. I took the microphone, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Thank you, Vivian, for your generous donation, I began. It's truly inspiring to see such support for a cause so close to my heart. I paused, meeting her gaze. In fact, Ethan and I have also made a contribution, one that reflects our personal values and priorities. Because at the end of the day, what truly matters is not just the size of the donation, but the sincerity behind it. The room erupted in polite applause, but the look on Vivian's face was priceless. For the first time, I had outmaneuvered her on her own turf. After the event, Ethan pulled me aside, his expression unreadable. Where did that come from? He asked, not unkindly. What do you mean? I replied, feigning innocence. You were so composed. Confident. It's not like you. I bristled at his words, but chose to see the silver lining. Maybe it's who I've always been, Ethan. You just haven't noticed. To my surprise, he didn't argue. Instead, he seemed thoughtful, almost introspective. It was the first time in months I felt like he was truly seeing me. In the days following the event, I continued to focus on my work and personal growth, refusing to let Vivian and Lila's antics consume me. Adam remained a steadfast ally, offering encouragement and advice when I needed it most. But the real breakthrough came when Ethan finally confronted his mother. I'd been thinking about what you said at the event, he told me one evening. And you're right. I've let them control us too much. That stops now. Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same team. Vivian and Lila didn't change overnight, of course. But they began to sense that their grip on Ethan, and me, was loosening. I stopped engaging with their drama, and Ethan started standing up for me in small but meaningful ways. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Vivian's control didn't dissipate easily. True to form, she staged one last attempt to reassert her dominance. She orchestrated a lavish gala under the guise of celebrating Ethan's business success, but used it as an opportunity to showcase her influence over her family. As the night unfolded, it became clear that I was the centerpiece of her unspoken narrative. She made subtle jabs about my career, my background, and even our marriage. Lila, ever her mother's loyal soldier, followed suit. But this time, I didn't crumble. "I have to hand it to you, Vivian," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You know how to command attention. But I think it's time we all stop pretending that your way is the only way." The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling over the crowd. Vivian's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping for just a moment before she recovered with a brittle smile. "I only want what's best for my son," she replied, her tone icy. "And so do I said. "But what's best for him, and for us, is to build a life on our terms, not yours." To my surprise and relief, Ethan stepped forward, his hand gently resting on my shoulder. "Kate's right," he said, his voice steady. "It's time I stop letting you dictate how we live our lives. I love you, Mom, but we're building something together, and we need space to do that." Vivian looked as though she'd been struck. For years, she had wielded her authority without question, and now her son, the one she'd always counted on, was drawing a line. The power dynamic shifted in that moment, and everyone in the room felt it. Life didn't transform overnight, but the changes were palpable. Vivian and Lila, while still formidable, no longer had the same hold over us. They tested boundaries occasionally, but Ethan and I held firm, presenting a united front. My career flourished as I took on bigger projects and found a supportive community of peers and mentors. Ethan, inspired by my independence, started exploring ways to step out of his mother's shadow in his own professional life. Our relationship grew stronger too. We learned to communicate better, to lean on each other rather than pulling away when things got tough. The challenges we had faced together became the foundation for something deeper and more resilient. Adam remained a trusted confidant, offering wisdom and humor when we needed it most. He even helped bridge the gap between us and Vivian, softening her sharp edges over time. "She'll never admit it," Adam told me one day, "but she respects you. You stood up to her in a way no one else ever has." It wasn't the kind of victory I had once imagined. There were no dramatic apologies or sudden transformations. But I had learned that true strength didn't come from forcing others to change. It came from staying true to myself, no matter the opposition. One afternoon, as I worked on a new design project in the home office Ethan and I had renovated together, I paused to take it all in. The sunlight streaming through the windows, the hum of Ethan's laughter from the next room as he played with our dog, the quiet peace of knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be. The journey had been messy, painful, and at times overwhelming. But it had also been worth it. I had found my voice, my purpose, and a love that was stronger for the trials it had endured. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The inheritance was all mine. Father would be happier if his son inherited everything rather than some woman who isn't even related by blood. "You're not my sister anymore, I'm cutting ties with you," my brother declared with a sneering smile. Indeed, to our father, I wasn't related by blood. I was my mother's child from a previous relationship. Still, he had loved me as his own daughter, which made him very special to me. I was furious that my brother wanted to monopolize everything our father left behind, but his words about cutting ties with me brought a sense of relief. "Fine by me, once you inherit, don't ever contact me again," I replied. Like I'd ever do that. "And don't expect a single penny from me later," he shot back. "I'm Kelly, a 29-year-old civil servant. My brother, Steve, is 22 and just graduated from university. He often brags about his prestigious job at a well-known company, always looking down on the rural city office where I work. Must be Dad's genes, right? I've got the blood of a father who worked for a major corporation," he'd boast, smugly emphasizing the bloodline he shares with our father. Steve and I share the same mother but have different fathers. Steve is the biological son of our father, while I am my mother's child from her previous marriage. Though I was technically a stepchild, Dad never treated me differently. He loved and cared for me deeply, which is why I regard him as my true father. My biological father, on the other hand, left us when I was little, running off with his mistress. I barely remember him. When Steve was younger, he didn't care about our different fathers, but everything changed after our mother passed away in a tragic car accident when I was an adult and Steve was still in middle school. Grieving and unable to cope, Steve started blaming me. At the funeral, he screamed, "Why did Mom have to die? It should have been you. No one would care if the step-sibling was gone." His cruel words shocked me, but I stayed silent as our father, angrier than I'd ever seen him, scolded Steve harshly. That day, Any affection I had for my brother faded. Over the years, our relationship deteriorated. Steve seemed obsessed with outshining me academically, but his ambitions always backfired. He failed to get into his first-choice schools for both high school and university. As a student, he couldn't out-earn me, a full-time employee, and he avoided sports or arts to escape potential failure. Instead, Steve focused on asserting his higher status as Dad's biological son. He taunted me endlessly, saying, "I'm Dad's real child, you're just an outsider." Initially, I believed his behavior stemmed from misplaced grief, but as he grew older, his words carried genuine malice. Exhausted by his provocations, I started avoiding him altogether. When Steve decided to live at home during university, I moved out to my own apartment. I even coordinated visits with Dad to ensure I wouldn't run into him. 4 years later, Steve graduated and landed a job at a reputable company. I had prepared a tie as a graduation gift but decided against giving it to him when he greeted me with his usual smugness. "Of course, I got a better job than you. I've got Dad's genes," he said, clearly unchanged by his time at university. I continued living independently, working as a civil servant, while Steve lived with Dad and navigated the struggles of a new working adult. Unfortunately, this phase didn't last long. Less than a year later, Dad fell gravely ill and passed away suddenly, leaving me no time to say goodbye. At the funeral, I took on the responsibilities of the chief mourner. Thanks to Dad's meticulous planning, most of the arrangements were straightforward, except for the inheritance. The only inheritors were Steve and me, and I knew the discussion would lead to conflict. As expected, Steve showed up late to our meeting without so much as an apology and immediately said, "The inheritance? I'm the real child, so it's all mine. You're just a stepchild, an outsider. Isn't it greedy for an outsider to claim anything?" Tired of his arrogance, I offered a deal. "I won't inherit anything. In return, you must promise never to contact me for the rest of your life." "Deal? Like I'd ever contact you. Just disappear," he said, sneering. Disgusted, I left the meeting. The next day, I visited a lawyer to formalize my renunciation of the inheritance. "Kelly, as a stepchild, you technically don't have inheritance rights," the lawyer started. "Actually, Dad adopted me legally," I interrupted, "but I don't want anything. I'm giving it all up." Dad had officially adopted me after marrying my mother, which meant I had full inheritance rights. But I wanted nothing to do with the complications of being labeled a stepchild or a legitimate child. I simply wanted to cut ties and move on. A month later, the family court finalized my renunciation. I was finally free from the burdens of my brother and the toxic family dynamic. I contacted Steve. "Hello, my renunciation of the inheritance is complete," I began. "You know, from the estate investigation, Dad had—" "Shut up," Steve cut me off angrily. "I get it. You've renounced the inheritance. Stop acting like you're my real sister, and don't ever contact me again." He hung up before I could say another word. I sighed deeply, knowing Steve. It was only a matter of time before he came crying back for help. That thought made me feel even worse. 3 months later, the calls and emails started coming in, numerous and persistent. I reluctantly answered one of his calls, hearing his exhausted voice on the other end. "You know what? I need to borrow some money," he said. "Dad had debts, and I can't keep up with the repayments. I used Dad's savings too, but it's still not enough." "What? Sure, Dad had some loans to repay, but if you've used all his savings for it, how is it still this bad?" I asked, confused. Steve immediately snapped. "Did you know about this? Did you push the debt onto me, knowing everything? You have such a bad personality." "Oh, right, because you're just a stepchild. You must be jealous of me, the legitimate child." I clenched my jaw. "Right, because I'm the one who hung up on you when I tried to warn you, and I'm the one who blocked your calls. Funny how you suddenly unblocked me when you needed help. Who's the one with the bad personality here?" The truth was, I had learned all about Dad's financial situation during the inheritance renunciation process. I had tried to inform Steve back then, but he had cut me off entirely, left with no way to communicate. I had given up trying. Now, he was coming to me in tears, just as I had anticipated. "Do you even understand how hard it was for Dad to send you to high school and university?" I asked, frustrated. "Sure, he had educational insurance and Mom's life insurance helped, but things like the house and car had to be paid for with loans. I'm not your sister, right? So why don't you take this up with the mortgage lender or the lawyer instead of me, an outsider?" "What are you talking about?" Steve retorted. "Don't sweat the small stuff. Besides, I'm treating you like a sister, even though you're just a stepchild. You should be happy about that. Now, come on, Kelly, give me some money. Furious at his arrogance, I sharply hung up the call and blocked his number. Steve didn't know where I lived, and I had made sure not to leave any clues about my home at Dad's house. To be safe, I even got a new phone. But that didn't stop him. Kelly, please, I need money, otherwise, I can't survive. Steve started showing up at the city office where I worked. Gone was his usual smugness. He looked genuinely distressed. He would visit repeatedly, always during lunch breaks, as if sneaking away from his job. On days he didn't visit, he bombarded my phone with calls, disrupting my work. I explained the situation to my boss, and they moved me to an administrative position, but Steve's harassment escalated. He began staying past closing hours, waiting in the parking lot to confront me after work. One evening, I finally had enough. I caught him lingering in the parking lot and dragged him aside. "Stop it already," I said. "Don't cause trouble at my workplace. I told you to consult the loan institutions and the lawyer." "I already did," Steve snapped, arms crossed, anger flashing in his eyes. "The group life insurance covered the mortgage, so I don't have to pay for the house anymore. The car loan is down to about $5,000, and I renegotiated the payments, but that's not the problem." "Then what is the problem?" I pressed. Steve hesitated, nervously looking around before finally admitting, "Dad had some savings, so I spent it on various things. I went over budget. Then I borrowed money from a friend, but now I can't pay him back. He's saying I scammed him, and no one else will lend me money. If I go to a predatory lender, I'll be in even deeper trouble." I sighed, my head pounding. His story was convoluted, but the truth was clear. Steve had spiraled into a financial mess of his own making. "So, let me get this straight," I said. "You kept borrowing money to pay off debts, and now you're stuck." "Exactly," he said, his desperation growing. "I think I'm already blacklisted. If you pay it off for me, it'll all be over. Just $88,000, come on, Kelly." When he reached out to me, I slapped his hand away. "There's no way I'm giving you a dime," I said coldly. "This is entirely your fault for overspending and borrowing from loan sharks. Why should I clean up your mess?" Steve glared at me, his voice dripping with contempt. "Is it because we're only half related? Stepchildren are the worst, so selfish and unpleasant." Without another word, I got into my car and started the engine. Steve tried to cling to the door, but I shoved him off. "You promised never to contact me again in exchange for the inheritance," I reminded him. "You've broken that promise, begged for money, and insulted me. I don't owe you anything. If you show up again, I'll call the police." "Kelly, please." I didn't let him finish. I drove off, leaving him behind in the parking lot. Steve continued to harass the city hall after that, showing up uninvited and lingering until closing time. He called multiple departments, disrupting their work. He didn't make a scene at the counters, so reporting him as a nuisance was difficult. Finally, I decided it was best to disappear. I explained everything to HR and was transferred to a branch office in the mountains. It was a quieter place, with fewer residents, but the work felt more fulfilling. I never returned to my old office. I didn't regret cutting ties with Steve, nor did I miss the complications of being labeled a stepchild or a legitimate child. Free at last, I could focus on building a life of my own, far from my brother's shadow. Life in the urban sprawl as a police officer doesn't just toughen you, it encases you in a shell of skepticism so thick it might as well be Kevlar. That was me, Emma, a 37-year-old former lieutenant turned private detective. I carried a suitcase of mistrust heavier than the cases I cracked. My daily grind orbiting around unfaithful partners and the art of deception, hardly the backdrop for a romantic tale. Then Bobby strolled into my life, a beacon of modern artistry, refreshing my world like a vibrant brushstroke on a faded mural. We crossed paths at an art exhibition in Philadelphia, surrounded by enthusiasts tossing around terms like postmodern and avant-garde with effortless poise. I, however, felt as out of place as a fish trying to pedal a bicycle. "Intriguing piece, isn't it?" Bobby said, his gaze fixed on what looked like a strategically arranged heap of junk. "If by intriguing, you mean I've seen tidier trash heaps, then absolutely," I quipped. His laugh, deep and resonant, turned heads. That laugh, and the man it belonged to, swept me into a whirlwind romance. Fast forward 7 months, and I was utterly smitten. Bobby was a dapper gentleman who seemed plucked from a bygone era, charming me with poetry readings, exquisite art shows, and an attention that made me feel like the only woman alive. Beneath a starlit sky in Central Park, he proposed, My yes came without hesitation, my heart pounding with sheer joy. The engagement was blissful, a haze of love and daydreams about a future brimming with laughter, adventure, and maybe children, but as the saying goes, if something seems too good to be true. Enter Marilyn, Bobby's mother, the epitome of frostiness. She scrutinized me with the air of someone inspecting a blemish on fine china. A detective? Isn't that a tad unladylike? She asked during our first dinner together. That depends on which century your ideals are anchored in, I replied, earning a tense smile from Bobby. Her visits grew more frequent, each one an audit of our burgeoning life together. 3 weeks into our marriage, she appeared unannounced one chilly Tuesday evening. Her disdain was as palpable as the cold outside. Emma, darling, she began, her voice dripping with condescension, still clinging to that quaint little job of yours? I had hoped marriage would refine you into a proper lady. I was slicing vegetables for dinner, the knife suddenly tempting for uses beyond the culinary. Marilyn, where I come from, we call this earning a living. You might try it sometime instead of leeching off others, I said, my voice steady. Her lips pursed, but she maintained her poised demeanor. Bobby was raised with certain expectations. Emma, there's still time for you to choose a more respectable career. Something like full-time meddling? I shot back, my tone sharp. Thanks, but I'll stick to tracking unfaithful spouses and deceivers. Speaking of which, how's your bridge club treating you? Bobby entered just then, his impeccable timing diffusing the tension, though his arrival didn't stop Marilyn's passive-aggressive commentary. Your wife has quite the flair for sharp remarks, she said sweetly. Mom, Bobby sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Emma's career is part of who she is. Can we not do this right now? I swallowed my irritation and turned back to the chopping board, letting the argument simmer with the vegetables. After Marilyn's visits, Bobby retreated into a shell of silence that I couldn't penetrate. It was painfully clear whose side he was on, and it wasn't mine. One particularly tense evening, after Marilyn had criticized everything from my cooking to my housekeeping, I confronted him. Why don't you ever stand up for me? I demanded. Your mother treats me like I'm invisible, and you just let her. Is this what our marriage is supposed to be? Bobby looked weary. Emma, she's old-fashioned. What do you want me to do? Cut her off? No, I want you to support me, to tell her she can't bulldoze over us. Is that asking too much? He sighed, raking his fingers through his hair. I'll talk to her, okay? Just give it some time, she'll adjust. But she didn't, neither did he. The distance between us grew, widened by Marilyn's coldness and Bobby's passivity, creating a chasm that felt impossible to bridge. Living with Bobby started to feel like being part of a melodrama, where the cracks in our perfect facade began to show. He worked at a prestigious art gallery, an impressive-sounding role until you considered how erratic his earnings were. Meanwhile, my detective work provided a comfortable lifestyle in a stylish apartment. One evening, as we discussed our future over dinner, I brought up the idea of eventually buying a house, envisioning the space we'd need if we planned to start a family. Bobby paused, his fork covering midair, and looked at me quizzically. Emma, where are you getting these ideas? We don't need a house, and me finding a new job isn't on the agenda. I set my fork down, trying to maintain a calm tone. It's not about need, Bobby, it's about planning for our future. A stable income would certainly help. He chuckled, a sound that used to warm my heart but now grated against my patience. You and your fixation on money, he said lightly. You always focus on the financial bottom line, don't you? Money isn't everything, Emma. His laughter pushed me to the edge. It's easy for you to say when you're not the one stressed about paying the bills each month. I'm not fixated on money, Bobby. He shrugged dismissively and returned to his meal as if we were merely discussing the weather. I'm happy with our life as it is. You're the one who's never satisfied. I stood, my appetite gone. Maybe I wouldn't be so focused on money if you contributed more than just critiques about how I manage ours. He didn't even glance up. I contribute in other ways. Emma, not everything is about money. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. This wasn't just about buying a house, planning for kids, or finances. It was about respect, partnership, and support, none of which Bobby seemed to value. As long as his life remained comfortable, he dismissed my concerns as an obsession with money, sidestepping the real issues between us. On a seemingly ordinary Sunday, our living room became an impromptu stage for high drama when Marilyn, my not-so-favorite mother-in-law, dropped by unannounced. The air grew tense as she remained glued to her phone, her voice wavering between panic and confusion. And you're telling me my social security number has been suspended? How much do I need to pay to fix this? Marilyn's voice cracked as she rummaged through her purse for her checkbook and documents. In the kitchen, coffee in hand, I overheard her mention social security and payments. Years of police work had sharpened my instincts, and alarm bells rang in my head. This was a scam. I hurried into the living room, my approach quiet but quick. Marilyn, hang up the phone. It's a scam, I interjected, my tone firm but calm. She turned to me, shocked and offended. I beg your pardon? I'm handling this, Emma. There's no need for your intrusion. Before she could protest further, I stepped forward and ended the call with a decisive click. Silence enveloped the room, thick with tension. Marilyn recoiled, her face twisting into an expression of fury and disbelief. How dare you? That was incredibly rude and uncalled for. Who do you think you are, treating me like some naive child? Bobby appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. His expression was a mix of concern and frustration. Emma, what's going on? Why are you upsetting my mother? I turned to him, my frustration mounting. That call was from scammers, Bobby. They were trying to con Marilyn out of her money by claiming her social security number was suspended. It's a common tactic. I've seen it 100 times. Bobby rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I recognized as him feeling cornered. Okay, but couldn't you have been more diplomatic about it? Marilyn, gathering her belongings with shaking hands, shot me a look sharp enough to curdle milk. I don't need to be saved, especially not by someone who treats me with such disrespect. I'll speak to the bank about this so-called scam. She stormed out, leaving a chilly silence behind. Bobby sighed, his gaze shifting between the door and me. Emma, I know you meant well, but you have to handle things more gently, especially with my mother. I felt a twinge of guilt but stood my ground. I know it seemed harsh, but there wasn't time for polite exchanges. Scammers thrive on urgency, and any hesitation could have cost Marilyn dearly. The next day, still feeling a mix of curiosity and guilt, I decided to call her. After 3 rings, she picked up, her voice cold and measured. What do you want, Emma? I cleared my throat. I just wanted to check on you after yesterday. Did you speak with the bank about that call? There was a pause before she reluctantly admitted. Yes, I did. They confirmed it was a scam. Her tone hardened. But that doesn't excuse how you handled things. You were rude and aggressive. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache coming on. I'm sorry if I seemed harsh. I was just trying to protect you. These scammers are professional deceivers and very convincing. Her reply was curt, laced with begrudging gratitude. Well, I suppose I should thank you for stopping me from making a mistake, but don't think this changes my view of your methods or your demeanor. Goodbye, Emma. The tension between Bobby and me deepened, turning our home from a warm sanctuary into a chilly battlefield. Clinging to hope, I saw his upcoming birthday as an opportunity to rekindle the fading spark in our relationship. I meticulously planned a weekend getaway just for the two of us, dreaming of restoring what we once had. However, Marilyn bulldozed through my plans with her own, scheduling a grand dinner at her mansion on a weekday, fully aware my work schedule was overflowing. I pleaded with her over the phone. Can't we push it to Saturday? I'm swamped at work. Her voice was a blend of syrup and frost. No, dear, this is when it's happening. Bobby shouldn't have to adjust his birthday to fit around your job. Frustration gnawed at me as I confided in my boss, a veteran of countless betrayals and deceptions. He understood the importance of gestures. Go, he urged, giving me a knowing look. Do what you need to do. Arriving at Marilyn's, the party was already in full swing, an ostentatious display of pretense. Marilyn spotted me immediately, her smile tightening as she whispered something to Bobby. There he was, my husband, ensconced by the fireplace, his arm casually draped around a woman who was more than just a colleague. My heart sank, but I steeled myself and approached them. Aren't you going to introduce me? I tried to keep my voice steady, though my emotions churned. Bobby, aren't you going to introduce me? He flinched, his eyes widening in shock. Emma, this is Lori, from the gallery, he muttered, glancing nervously at her before turning to me. And this is Emma, a relative. The words hit me like a slap. A relative? My voice rose before I could stop it. Your wife, Bobby, or have you conveniently forgotten? The room fell silent, the tension crackling like static electricity. Bobby's expression twisted, a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. You know, he snapped, a real wife would have made her husband's birthday a priority. He turned away dismissively, his words cutting deeper than I thought possible. Before I could respond, Marilyn appeared, her voice dripping with disdain. You see, Emma, you just don't fit in here. Bobby needs someone supportive, like Lori, not, whatever this is. She gestured vaguely at me, her disdain unmistakable. Her next words were cold and biting. I think it's best if you leave. You're not wanted here. I stood frozen for a moment, Marilyn's venomous words echoing in my ears. Then, I straightened my spine and met her gaze with all the strength I could muster. You're right, Marilyn. I don't belong in a family built on lies and deception. With as much dignity as I could gather, I walked out, the chill of the night air wrapping around me like an unwelcome embrace. After the debacle of Bobby's birthday and the revelations that followed, I knew I needed undeniable proof to sever this marriage on my terms, but the idea of uncovering Bobby's betrayal myself was unbearable. I reached out to Alan, a trusted colleague with a knack for uncovering discreet affairs. Alan, I said, my voice barely steady, I need a favor. Anything for you, he replied without hesitation. What's going on? It's Bobby. I think he's seeing someone. I need evidence, I admitted, the words tasting bitter. Say no more, Alan assured me. I'll handle it discreetly. You'll have everything you need. He was true to his word. The evidence he gathered was damning. Photos, audio, and more. Lori wasn't just a fling. She was here illegally, seeking a quick marriage to secure her status. She and Bobby had even been involved in fraud. Part of me wanted to confront Bobby with the evidence, but I knew better. He didn't deserve my anger, my pain, or my time. Filing for divorce was painful but necessary, like tearing off a band-aid over a festering wound. I demanded financial compensation, just a fraction of what I had lost emotionally and financially during our marriage. Marilyn, ever the dragon lady, sided with Bobby, painting me as the villain, but armed with the evidence, I stood my ground. When the papers were signed, I felt an overwhelming sense of release. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new life. I poured my energy into opening my detective agency, turning my pain into purpose. The agency thrived quickly, building a reputation for discretion and effectiveness. It was a reflection of everything I'd learned, the lies, the betrayals, and the resilience I had cultivated. Every case was a small victory, a piece of myself healing as I helped others uncover their own truths. One morning, as I sifted through files, Alice, my right-hand woman, peeked into my office. Boss, we've got a potential case. A woman suspects her husband is having an affair. I smiled, the irony not lost on me. Sounds like our bread and butter. What's the catch? She's on a tight budget, Alice said. I thought for a moment. This was my chance to help someone like the person I used to be. We'll work with her budget, I decided. And Alice, let's make sure we're thorough. I know all too well what it's like to be on the other side of this. Life has a way of coming full circle. A week after Marilyn's surprise visit to my agency, my phone buzzed with a number I thought I'd erased. Seeing Bobby's name flash on the screen felt surreal. Against my better judgment, I answered. Emma, he began, his voice carrying a blend of hope and desperation. I've been thinking. I want us to start over, have kids, build a future together. I snorted, unable to hold back my disbelief. Really? And where would we live in this fantasy of yours? With my mom, at first, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We'll save money, and then you can buy us a house. It'll be perfect. This time, I laughed, loud and unrestrained. You really haven't changed, Bobby. You still think I exist to clean up your messes and fund your dreams. Emma, please, he stammered. I've changed. We can fix this. I paused, reflecting on the years I had wasted and the strength I had found since leaving him. Then, with a calm I hadn't known before, I said, No, Bobby, you haven't changed. Goodbye. Hanging up felt like closing the final chapter of a book I'd long since finished. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. As I returned to my work, I felt a surge of purpose. The past was behind me, and the future stretched out like a blank canvas, ready for me to paint with bold, vibrant strokes. Life's best revenge is living well, and I was fully committed to doing just that. The black dress feels wrong against my skin as I stand before my 7-year-old son's casket. Wrong because Nathan should be here, holding my hand, sharing this unbearable weight. Wrong because parents shouldn't outlive their children. And wrong, so profoundly wrong, because while I bury our son, my husband is in Hawaii with his mistress. I know this because a photo landed on my phone 10 minutes ago. Nathan, tan and grinning, a cocktail in hand, his arm draped around a blonde who can't be older than 30. Below it, The message read, "Thought you should see what your husband's really doing today. A concerned friend." My mother's hand tightens around my arm. "Gabrielle, you're shaking." She's right. The phone trembles in my grip until I shove it into my purse, its weight pressing against me like the judgmental eyes of the mourners around us. Whispers ripple through the small chapel. Secrets spread fast in our town. And Nathan's glaring absence at his own son's funeral will fuel gossip for months. "I'll kill him," my mother mutters, her voice low and trembling with fury. "That bastard. I'll kill him with my bare hands." The small, white coffin gleams under the chapel lights, draped in a blanket of roses, Lucas's favorite. He loved how food coloring could transform their pale petals into vivid blues and purples. We spent hours in the hospital together, conducting experiments just to see him smile through the pain. Nathan's parents linger near the edge of the crowd, their expressions carefully neutral. Linda, my mother-in-law, meets my gaze briefly before turning away. She knows. She's probably always known. The funeral director approaches, clipboard in hand. "Are we ready to begin?" I want to scream that I'm not ready, that none of this is right. Lucas should be home playing video games, begging for 5 more minutes before bedtime. Instead, I nod and take my place in the front pew. My phone buzzes again. This time, it's a message from Nathan himself. "Sorry I couldn't make it. Important business meeting. We'll make it up to you." A wave of rage washes over me, scorching away my grief for one fleeting moment and leaving behind something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. I delete the message and sit up straighter. Let him enjoy his Hawaiian paradise with his cheap mistress. Let him think he's won, that I'll crumble under the weight of my grief like a dutiful, broken widow. He's wrong. I'm going to destroy him, not just for abandoning Lucas during his illness, not just for missing his funeral, but for every lie, every betrayal, every selfish moment when he put himself first. Piece by piece, I'll take everything from him until he understands what true loss feels like. The reception at my parents' house feels like a staged play, everyone performing their assigned roles. In the kitchen, Linda corners me, her manicured nails digging into my arm just a little too hard. "Nathan's going through a difficult time," she says, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "We all process grief differently." I shake her off, focusing instead on arranging cookies that no one will eat onto a serving tray. "Is that what we're calling it now? Processing grief in Hawaii?" Her lips press into a thin line. "You've always had a flair for dramatics, Gabrielle. Perhaps if you'd been more understanding during Lucas's illness." "Don't you dare." My mother's voice slices through the room, sharp and unyielding. She steps into the doorway, and I've never seen her look so furious. "Don't you dare blame my daughter for your son's cowardice." Linda stiffens, her composure slipping for the briefest moment. "Margaret, this is hardly the time." "It's exactly the time." My mother closes the distance between them, her smaller frame somehow towering over Linda's. "While my daughter was sleeping in hospital chairs for months, where was Nathan? While my grandson fought for his life, where were you and Robert, with your family support?" The sound of shattering porcelain interrupts her tirade. I've crushed a cookie in my fist, crumbs scattering across the counter. In the living room, my father asks a guest about his newspaper for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, oblivious to the storm brewing in the kitchen. "We contributed financially," Linda says stiffly, her voice laced with condescension, which is more than I can say for some people. My mother laughs, a cold, bitter sound. "Oh yes, your precious money. Tell me, Linda, does Nathan know about the trust fund yet? The one Robert's father left specifically for his great-grandchildren?" Linda's face goes pale. This is the first I'm hearing of any trust fund, but it's clear from her reaction that this information wasn't meant for me. "That's a family matter," she hisses. "Lucas was family," I say quietly, the pieces falling into place. He was the only great-grandchild. That money was his. The tension in the kitchen becomes suffocating as Linda's perfectly composed mask begins to crack, revealing something dark and calculating beneath. All those times she discouraged Nathan from spending time with Lucas. All those business trips she conveniently arranged during his hospital stays. It wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate. "I think you should leave," my mother says, her voice ice cold. But Linda's already retreating, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like tiny hammers driving nails into the foundation of my growing rage. I turn to my mother, my voice tight. "Tell me everything about that trust fund." Her smile is grim, filled with years of quiet fury. "Oh, sweetheart, that's just the beginning of what I have to tell you." 3 days after the funeral, I find the life insurance papers in Nathan's home office, not tucked away in a drawer or neatly filed. but scattered across his desk like discarded leaves, forms, receipts, and a post-it note scribbled with "Call Samri policy" in his hasty handwriting. My hands tremble as I sift through the papers. Then I see it, Lucas's life insurance policy, taken out 6 months after his diagnosis, $2 million. My breath catches as my eyes land on the beneficiary line, Nathan Thompson, sole recipient. My name has been crossed out. The change dated mere weeks before Lucas died. My phone buzzes, a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Coffee shop on Main, now. Samantha." The name hits like a slap. Sam, the woman in the Hawaii photo, the same Sam from the post-it note. I find her exactly where she said she'd be, looking polished and expensive in a way that reeks of someone else's money. She doesn't stand as I approach, only stirs her coffee with calculated precision. "I'm surprised you came," she says without looking up. "And I'm surprised you had the nerve to contact me." Now she looks up, her gaze hard. "Nathan's been promising me things, big things, but now he's not returning my calls." "What kind of things?" I ask, though I'm not sure I want the answer. "A fresh start, a new life together." Her laugh is bitter. "Funded by your son's insurance money." The room tilts sideways, and I grip the edge of the table to steady myself. "He told you about that?" "He tells me everything." She pulls out her phone and scrolls through messages, including how he made sure you'd never see a penny of it. His mother's idea. Apparently, she never thought you deserved their family money. "Why are you telling me this?" She leans forward, her voice sharp. "Because he's playing both of us. That policy? He promised to split it with me, but I did some digging. He's got gambling debts. Gabrielle, big ones, the kind that make people desperate." My throat is dry. "You're lying." Samantha slides her phone across the table. Text messages, bank statements, photos, a digital trail of betrayal spanning months. Nathan and Linda plotting, Nathan and Samantha planning, Nathan at casinos, with loan sharks, at places he had no business being while our son was dying. "I'm not the villain here," Samantha says quietly. "I'm just another mark in his con. But unlike you, I've got nothing left to lose." I stand, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're wrong about one thing. I have nothing left to lose either." Samantha smiles, all teeth. "Then maybe we should help each other." I look at her, the woman who helped destroy my family, and realize she might be exactly what I need, a weapon aimed straight at Nathan's heart. Later, I find my father sitting in Lucas's room, holding a worn stuffed penguin. It went with Lucas to every hospital stay, his comfort through endless treatments. "You look just like your mother when she's planning something dangerous," he says, his voice unusually clear. I sink onto the bed beside him, the mattress still indented from where Lucas spent his final weeks. "Dad, do you remember what we talked about yesterday?" He strokes the penguin's matted fur. "No, but I remember Lucas telling me about the trust fund." His brow furrows. "Was that real?" My heart skips. "What trust fund, Dad?" "The one Nathan's father wanted to discuss. Robert came here when Lucas was sick, said something about protecting family assets." His gaze drifts. "Did I dream that?" I take his hand, steadying my voice, despite the storm inside me. "No, Dad, when exactly was this?" "Your mother was at the hospital with Lucas. Robert brought papers." His grip tightens, surprisingly strong. "I didn't sign them. They felt wrong, like when you smell smoke but can't see the fire." The pieces click into place. Robert's unexpected visit, Linda's manipulations, Nathan's sudden interest in our family's property. It wasn't just about Lucas's insurance money, they were after everything. My phone buzzes again, a message from Samantha. "Nathan's back, meeting with his lawyer tomorrow, something about property transfers." "I should have protected you better," my father says, his voice cracking. "Both of you." "You did, Dad," I whisper, gripping his hand, "by not signing those papers." I stand, my decision crystallizing, and now it's my turn. He holds out the penguin. "Lucas knew. He told me not to worry about you because you're stronger than everyone thinks." His eyes cloud over. "Who's Nathan?" The familiar ache of watching him slip away mingles with a new, fiery determination. I take the penguin, its soft weight anchoring me to this moment. My phone buzzes again. This time, it's Uncle Peter. "Found something in the property records. Come to my office, now." I kiss my father's forehead. "I have to go, Dad, but I promise you, they won't take anything else from this family." Uncle Peter's office is a fortress of filing cabinets and legal documents, but what he shows me isn't buried in a drawer. It's on his computer, a series of property transfers dating back to when Lucas first got sick. They've been planning this for months, Peter says, scrolling through document after document, shell companies, hidden accounts, all leading back to Nathan and his parents. My fingers trace the dates on the screen. Each one aligns with a hospital stay, a chemotherapy session, a day when I was too consumed with saving Lucas to notice what Nathan was doing. Here's the kicker, Peter continues, pulling up another file. They used Lucas's medical bills to justify emergency sales of your joint assets. Everything's been quietly moved into accounts you can't access. A knock at the door startles us. It's Samantha, looking less polished than before. Sorry to interrupt, but Nathan's meeting got moved up. He's at the lawyer's office now. Peter glances at his watch. That's not possible. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow. It was, Samantha says. Linda changed it. They're signing everything over today. Once it's done, she lets the sentence hang. My phone buzzes, a text from Nathan. We need to talk about the house, coming by later. The house, my parents' house, the place where my father still lives, the place where Lucas spent his final days, the property that's been in my family for generations. I square my shoulders. Show me everything. For the next hour, Peter and I sift through every document, every transfer, and every carefully constructed lie. Rage simmers beneath my calm exterior as we unravel Nathan's trail of gambling debts hidden behind corporate facades, Linda's systematic dismantling of our joint assets, and Robert's attempts to manipulate my father into signing away his rights. There's one more thing, Samantha says quietly, pulling out her phone. She presses play on a recording. Nathan's voice fills the room, discussing with Linda how they could use my father's condition to their advantage. The words echo like nails driven into a coffin, sealing away any lingering doubts. The recording ends, leaving only silence. In that silence, I hear Lucas's voice in my memory. Promise you won't let them take our home, Mom. We can stop them, Peter says, but we have to act now. I stand, gathering the documents we've printed. No, I'm not just going to stop them. I reach into my bag, pulling out Lucas's worn penguin and setting it on Peter's desk. I'm going to take everything back, and I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone else again. A faint smile curves Samantha's lips. I was hoping you'd say that. I know exactly where they've hidden the real estate contracts. Get your coat, I tell Peter, a fiery resolve building inside me. We're going to Nathan's lawyer's office, and this time, I'm not leaving without what's mine. The penguin watches silently as the three of us, unlikely allies forged by betrayal, step into the night. The lawyer's office feels cold, a calculated stage set for confrontation. Nathan sits across the polished conference table, flanked by Linda and Robert. Between us lies a thick stack of documents, a fortress of their deceit. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Nathan says, sliding the papers toward me. Just sign, for Lucas. My hand clenches around the USB drive in my pocket, the drive containing every piece of evidence Peter and I painstakingly gathered, fraudulent documents, recorded conversations, and an irrefutable paper trail. Don't you dare say his name, I bite out. Linda leans forward, her manicured nails tapping against the table in feigned sympathy. Gabrielle, dear, you're clearly not thinking clearly. Grief can make people. Her words are cut off by Samantha's sharp voice. Show them. She strides in, followed by Peter, her phone already in hand. Nathan pales. What is she doing here? Connecting the USB to the lawyer's computer, I watch the projector flicker to life. One by one, the evidence scrolls across the screen, property transfers, falsified signatures, and recordings of Nathan and Linda plotting to exploit my father's dementia. It's over, I say. Nathan's smile freezes me. Actually, he pulls out another folder, tossing it onto the table. The photographs inside make my stomach drop. Peter meeting with known criminals, bank statements showing questionable transfers, and emails hinting at tax fraud. Imagine how damaging this would be for your family, Linda says softly, her tone venomous. Your uncle's business destroyed, your mother implicated, your father uprooted from his home. Peter starts to protest, but Nathan cuts him off. We can make this all go away, or we can destroy everything you have left. Your choice. The room spins as every carefully laid plan crumbles before me. They weren't just stealing, they'd built their own insurance policy against exposure. Nathan stands, his tone smug. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Choose wisely. They leave, their threats hanging heavy in the air. The projector continues cycling through the evidence, now a testament to a battle I'm no longer certain I can win. They won't stop, Samantha whispers. They'll take everything, piece by piece. I stare at the last image on the screen, Lucas in the hospital, smiling weakly. Nathan, as always, was nowhere to be found. No, I say, my voice steady, they won't take anything else, not from me. It's time we stop playing their game, we're changing the rules. That night, my mother's kitchen transforms into a war room. Documents cover every surface as Margaret, my mother, lays out her own secret cache of evidence, years of surveillance, bank statements, and recorded conversations. I've been tracking Nathan's schemes since Lucas's first hospital stay, she explains. I knew something wasn't right when he started pressuring your father about the property titles. Peter studies one of the documents, his face lighting up. These transfers, they're legally binding, but they're not what Nathan thinks they are. A knock at the door makes us freeze. Samantha steps inside, her phone recording. They're on their way. Linda convinced Nathan, tonight's the night to force your hand. Perfect timing, my mother says, a dangerous gleam in her eyes. Peter pulls up more files. Every property Nathan tried to steal, every asset he thought he owned, all legally transferred into a trust in Lucas's name. How? I whisper. Your father had more clear days than they realized, Margaret says. We made sure everything was properly signed and notarized during those moments. Nathan was too busy creating fake documents to notice the real ones. Headlights sweep across the windows, and car doors slam. Remember, Peter says, his voice urgent. Let them think they're in control. When Nathan bursts in, his smile is triumphant, until Samantha presses play on her phone. The recordings play, Nathan and Linda confessing to fraud, discussing how to manipulate my father, and plotting every move. You set us up, Nathan snarls, lunging forward. No, I say, my voice cold. You set yourself up. Every fake document, every fraudulent transfer, they've already been sent to the FBI. Linda reaches for her folder of threats, but my mother snatches it. Looking for these? She asks, her tone steel. Funny thing about evidence, it works both ways. Nathan's face twists in rage. You can't. I already have. I cut him off. The only question now is how far you want to take this, because I'm ready to lose everything to make sure you lose more. The silence that follows is deafening. The next morning, as frost crunches beneath my feet, I visit Lucas's grave. I set his penguin against the stone, its familiar weight grounding me. You'd be proud, Lucas, I whisper. We protected what mattered. My father joins me, more lucid than usual. Lucas told me not to worry about you. He said you'd find your strength. I smile softly. Did he? He nods, touching the penguin. Funny thing about strength, it sometimes looks like revenge, but it's really just love wearing armor. The weight of everything, the battles, the loss, the hard-won justice, settles on my shoulders. It isn't triumph, it's survival. As we turn to leave, a monarch butterfly flutters onto Lucas's headstone, its wings glowing like stained glass. Let it be, I tell my father as he reaches for it. The butterfly takes flight, free and unburdened, and for the first time, I understand what it means to let go.